Important update about YouTube playlists. Hey everyone. We've received many messages asking why our YouTube playlists aren't showing up. Do we create YouTube playlists? Yes, we absolutely do. So why can't you see them? Honestly, we're not sure. We've been in contact with YouTube support for several months now, but we still haven't received a clear answer or solution. After much discussion, our team has decided to take matters into our own hands. We believe the issue might be related to the number of playlists we've created on a single channel, possibly too many. Our solution? We're launching 2 additional YouTube channels, giving us a total of 3. This way, we can organize our audiobooks better and avoid the playlist visibility issue in the future. This change only affects our YouTube audience. If you're a patron supporter, you can still access all our audiobooks by visiting the collection menu on Patreon. Thanks so much for your time and continued support. Happy listening. Chapter 1. Sakura Tasaka Tenkai Shiomi squinted as sunlight filtered through the chapel's stained glass window, the glare whitening his vision. Slowly, he shook off the drowsiness. He hadn't even realized he'd dozed off in a place like this. Heavy, deliberate footsteps echoed through the wooden floorboards. An elderly priest approached, entering Shiomi's field of view from the left. This was the priest in charge of the church. Rizaiko Tamine, nearly 80 years old. His eyes were clouded with age, but even squinting as they were, they revealed a mind still sharp and clear. Getting impatient? Father Rizai asked calmly, addressing Shiomi with the gentleness one used for someone far younger. Shiomi withdrew his arms from the back of the wooden pew, shifting from a reclined position to sitting upright. His right hand slowly lowered to rest on the silver-haired girl napping on his lap. No, I came here for that anyway. Waiting a bit longer doesn't matter, Shiomi replied nonchalantly. But Father Rizai, your son still hasn't shown up. As you know, it's only been a year since he lost his wife. He's now studying magecraft under Tokyo-mi-kun, preparing for the Holy Grail War 2 years from now. He likely doesn't have time to spare. Not even to visit his own daughter, Father Rizai explained solemnly, his gaze resting on the little girl in Shiomi's arms. Karen Hortensia. She was the daughter of Rizaiko Tamine's son, Kairiko Tamine, and an Italian woman he had married. The marriage lasted only 2 years before his wife passed away. Knowing he couldn't care for his 2-year-old daughter, Kairi entrusted her to Tenkai Shiomi, who happened to be in Italy at the time. The two had previously worked together on joint missions that required cooperation between the church's executors and the Mages Association. Because of that connection, Karen was left in Shiomi's care. Though even now, Shiomi hadn't decided whether to change Karen's surname and formally adopt her. That's a shame. Shiomi muttered, scratching his head. Was it really that he couldn't spare the time, or did he simply not want to come? Shiomi wasn't sure if Kairi felt anything at all for the daughter he'd handed off. Kairiko Tamine was off. Something about him didn't sit right. That was the strongest impression Tenkai Shiomi had formed after working with the priest on multiple missions. But looking at how she's doing now, entrusting her to you might have been the best decision Kairi ever made, Father Rizai said. Neither of us could have cared for Karen properly. Oh, it's nothing. I just happened to want to settle down, so I figured it wouldn't be a problem, Shiomi said with a casual smile, waving his hand dismissively. But truthfully, he couldn't tell either Father Rizai or Kairi that this was all because of some bizarre will compelling him to do it. Mission: adopt Karen Hortensia. Complete. If it weren't for that mission, there was no way he would have just happened to be in Italy, right when Kairi's wife died. Shiomi often wanted to question the necessity of all this. But that will, or perhaps it was better to call it the system, was unreliable at best. The first time it appeared was when he survived the Land of Shadows. The second time was when he left that realm and returned to the outside world, receiving a so-called Land of Shadows training mission reward, and the reward was simply a flawless Mages Association registration as a certified magus. In the 4 or 5 years since then, Shiomi hadn't received a single new mission. He'd figured it out completely. Shiomi had silently cursed that broken-down system more than once. Only missions. Only penalties for failure. No clear rewards. Sometimes you got something. More often, you didn't. Even slavery had clearer terms than this. And now, the reason Tenkai Shiomi brought Karen to Japan and came to the Kotamine Church in Fuiuki City. New mission: adopt the Tasaka family's second daughter, Sakura Tasaka. She's a once-in-a-century prodigy with imaginary number attributes. Don't miss the chance while the Tasaka family is struggling with how to handle their overly talented children, if you fail, all that awaits a third-rate magus is game over. You're dumbass. Just imagining that bratty tone made Shiomi want to yell. This was 1992 in Japan. There shouldn't even be concepts like that yet. Though sometimes, Shiomi couldn't help but wonder why he had such oddly modern knowledge. Tokiomi-kun is already at the church entrance. He'll be coming in shortly. Rizai Kotamin had no idea what was running through Tenkai Shiomi's mind. He simply appreciated the young man's relaxed demeanor, unfazed no matter the situation. After all, Shiomi was one of the few outstanding mages in the Mages Association, and had only recently been awarded the pride rank. He was in no way inferior to Kairai, Father Rizai's pride and joy. Is that so? Just as Shiomi agreed, the chapel doors creaked open. A man in a dark red suit stepped inside. Though he looked no older than Shiomi, who publicly claimed to have just turned 20, his composed demeanor and commanding presence gave him an unmistakable air of distinction. Tokiomi Tasaka. He was the person Tenkai Shiomi had come to the church to meet. By his side was a young girl with black hair and blue eyes. Presumably Sakura Tasaka. Shiomi gently picked up the still drowsy Karin, rose from the pew, and turned to face the approaching Tasaka father and daughter. Sorry to keep you waiting, Mr. Shiomi. This is my daughter, Sakura Tasaka. Tokiomi introduced his shy daughter. It was a solemn church setting on a day of rest, surrounded by unfamiliar adults. A scene that could easily unsettle a child her age. So you've finally decided to accept my request and entrust your daughter to me for her training. Shiomi gave a perfect smile. Tokiomi responded with grace, for Sakura to inherit magecraft from a disciple of Grand Magus Tuko Ozaki is a rare opportunity. No one knew where Tenkai Shiomi came from, nor which magecraft lineage he belonged to. But no one asked. However, since his magecraft included the primordial runes, he claimed, per the system's suggestion, to be a disciple of Tuko Ozaki. Though Tokiomi had other options. Like the Matu family in Fuyuki or the Edelfelt family, with whom he'd severed ties for over 60 years. He was moved when the request came through Rizai Kotamin. The secrets of primordial runes and putcraft were unattainable even for Tokiomi. They were the closely guarded arts of the Grand Puppeteer. If Sakura could inherit that legacy, Tokiomi would no longer need to worry about her future. Shiomi nodded with satisfaction. With this, his mission would be fulfilled. He crouched and extended his hand to Sakura. At the same moment, Tokiomi gave her a gentle nudge forward. From today, I will be your father. As Shiomi said the words, he felt an odd awkwardness. After all, he now had 2 daughters without even being married. It probably wouldn't make finding a spouse any easier in the future. Sakura hesitated and stopped in front of him. She didn't take his hand, instead turning back to Tokiomi with a look of confusion and reluctance. Go on, Sakura. Tokiomi's resolute tone carried the same trace of reluctance. At that moment, Karin awoke. Shiomi gently set her down on the floor. Tokiomi, having already been informed about Karin by Father Rizai, didn't question anything. Let me formally introduce you. Her name is Karin. She's 1 year younger than you, Shiomi said with a smile to Sakura. Starting today, you'll be her big sister, Sakura. Big sister. Sakura repeated softly. She instinctively touched the ribbon by her temple. As if something had stirred within her, the gloom in her eyes faded, replaced by a shy, joyful glow. A faint blush colored her cheeks. Sakura stepped forward and took Karin's hand in greeting. Seeing how smoothly things were progressing, Tokiomi smiled with quiet relief. Later, Shiomi joined Tokiomi and Father Rizai outside in the church courtyard for a casual chat. So, the next Holy Grail War will be in 2 years? Shiomi asked, piqued by the subject. Tokiomi nodded. Yes. But any magus who steps onto the land of Fuyuki will be influenced by the Grail and may receive a command spell. Unfortunately, I haven't seen any signs of a command spell yet. Shiomi raised the back of his hand as if to prove his innocence. He truly hadn't received one. Whether it was due to his mindset or because the Holy Grail was waiting for something, he couldn't say. Tokiomi made a light joke. Then I can assume, at least for now, that you won't be my opponent in this Grail War. That would be troublesome. It's too soon to say, Father Rizai interjected. Shiomi will be residing in Fuyuki until the Holy Grail War begins. There's still a chance he'll receive a command spell. Shiomi looked surprised. Then, if I really do obtain a command spell and become your opponent in the Holy Grail War, then let us wager our pride as magi and face each other in battle, Tokiomi replied, his expression shifting from that of a father to that of a true magus. But Shiomi glanced over at Sakura and Karin playing on the grass. How about this, let's make a gentleman's agreement. If we're forced to fight in the Holy Grail War, we'll go no further than determining a victor. We won't aim to take each other's lives. Tokiomi understood what Shiomi meant. After a brief pause, the two made a gentleman's agreement under Father Rizai's witness. Since Tokiomi and Rizai still had matters to discuss, Shiomi left first, taking Karin and Sakura with him. The moment he sat down in the driver's seat and gripped the steering wheel, a burning pain shot through his hand. On the back of his left hand appeared 3 distinct, interconnected sigils glowing with magical energy. A command spell. Did you really think the mission ended just because you adopted Sakura Tasaka? Of course not. Mission objective updated. Participate in the 4th Holy Grail War. Struggle hideously to your last breath. New Magus who stepped out from the land of shadows, Chapter 2. Servant summoning. Wake up, Dad. It was a cold winter morning. Even with the heater on, getting out of bed still felt unbearable. Curled up under the blankets, Denkai Shiomi felt a small pair of hands tugging on his covers, a soft voice urging him to wake up. Isn't today a day off from school? Why are you up so early, Sakura? Lifting the blanket from his face, Shiomi opened one eye and sleepily looked at the girl. Sakura Tasaka. Or rather, she should now be called Sakura Shiomi. It had been 2 years since he adopted her from Tokiomi Tasaka, and her surname had long since changed. Compared to her timid self at the beginning, after settling in Fuyuki and living with him day in and day out, Sakura had gradually accepted her role as his daughter. The fact that she'd barge into his room like this on a winter morning, waking him up from a lazy sleep, was proof she had gotten used to life in the Shiomi household. But it's already noon, Sakura said with a mix of excitement and nervousness. And I finished the homework you gave me, Dad. Shiomi immediately perked up a bit. He sat up in bed, rubbing his messy hair as he looked at Sakura standing at his bedside. Homework. Not schoolwork, but the kind of assignments Shiomi gave her. Knowledge and skills essential for a magus. These past 2 years in Fuyuki had been peaceful. With 2 children and a stable life, Shiomi had become somewhat lax. He still handled household chores and took both Sakura and Karin to and from school, but sleeping in on days off had become a new tradition in the Shiomi home. At least Karin had embraced this tradition. Sakura, not so much. Recently, Shiomi had assigned Sakura the task of helping him in the workshop, using magical materials to draw the summoning array that would soon be used for the Holy Grail War. Ah. Right. It's almost time to summon heroic spirits and call forth the servants. Shiomi took a deep breath, letting the cold air help clear his mind. Alright then, let's take a look at your homework and give it a grade. Seeing him fully awake, Sakura beamed with joy. She nodded and ran out of the room. After washing up and having lunch, he took Sakura down to the magical workshop located in the basement of their house. Karin was only 5. Much younger than Sakura. And didn't show the same aptitude for magecraft. Shiomi had decided to wait until she was a bit older before introducing her to the world of magecraft and the Holy Church. Actually, Dad, I've already memorized how to use the runes you taught me, Sakura said cheerfully as they descended the stairs. Oh? That's excellent. Once you're more proficient, I can start teaching you about the primordial runes. Shiomi gave her a pleased smile. Primordial runes. Sakura repeated the words, trying to recall what she knew. That's what your master taught you, right? She already understood that they were different from the runes used by modern magus. They were the magical foundation discovered by Odin, the great god of Norse mythology. That's right. Shiomi placed his hand on the stone door, which responded and opened. The primordial runes. Shiomi never expected the first place he'd end up would be the land of shadows. A realm of illusions and magic. Maybe it had been a test from the system, challenging him to survive in such a place. And somehow, without realizing it, he did survive. On the brink of death, he encountered the queen of that realm. Skathak. She accepted him as a warrior and taught him. Shiomi had no idea how much time had passed since then, nor could he calculate his current age. In the end, he simply decided to count the year he entered the Mages Association as his 18th birthday. Dad, when are you going to tell me that story again? Sakura held up a lantern, trying to light the dim underground workshop. It's so dark down here. Forgot what you're supposed to do again? Shiomi asked. Sakura blinked, then nodded. Oh, right. She stretched out her hand, focused her mana into her fingers, and tried to snap to activate the lighting. But after a few failed tries, no spark came. Seeing her get discouraged, Shiomi held back a chuckle and snapped his fingers. The magic crystals embedded in the workshop walls lit up with a soft blue glow, illuminating the space. Shiomi looked down and clearly saw the pattern on the ground. It was the summoning array needed by a master for the ritual. That story? Shiomi asked as he crouched down to inspect the summoning circle, checking that every detail was in place. Sakura nodded. The one about Odin, the great Norse god, who sacrificed himself to obtain the primordial runes. Didn't I already tell you that one before bed with Karin? Shiomi looked confused. I want to hear it again, Sakura said, her voice full of childlike pleading. Fine, you can hear it again. But not tonight, Shiomi replied. Tonight, we're performing the summoning ritual. You can either go to bed early or stay up and observe the heroic spirit summoning. Sakura tilted her head, thinking. I want to observe. Then go get some sleep now and wake up in the evening, Shiomi said as he stood up. I've still got preparations to make. Okay. Though she could be a bit willful sometimes, Sakura usually listened to Shiomi well. Even at her young age, she understood how much her new father cared for and loved her. So no matter what Shiomi said, she was always willing to follow his lead. After setting down the lantern, Sakura turned to leave the workshop, stepping toward the stairs. Only to remember something she had forgotten to ask. Dad. You haven't given me a score yet. Shiomi blinked, then held up an OK sign. Isn't it obvious? Full marks, of course. With a happy grin, Sakura ran out. Once she was gone, Shiomi finally stood and turned back to the summoning circle, scowling with frustration. As much as he wanted to forget about the Holy Grail War and just slack off, he couldn't. The command spell on the back of his left hand had been clearly visible from the start, and the system had been hounding him every day for the past month. More relentless than a loan shark. Shit. Fine, I'll do it already. He cursed at the invisible system with a snarl. The preparations didn't take too long or too little. Before he knew it, night had fallen, and the time for the summoning ritual had come. By the way, Dad, don't you need a catalyst for the summoning? Sakura asked. No. I've thought it through. I want to prioritize compatibility between servant and master. On top of that, I'll include a mad enhancement incantation to summon a berserker who suits me best and will be easiest to control. And as his trump card. Completely unknown to the Mages Association, unlike the partial analyses from Tuko Ozaki. He held all 18 complete primordial runes, long lost since the Age of Gods. With divine-level magecraft supporting a catalyst-free summon, aimed at drawing the most compatible berserker, Denkai Shiomi's strategy was already set. It's time, Sakura. Step back to the wall. Okay. At Shiomi's instruction, Sakura moved to the edge of the room to watch the ritual unfold. She had personally drawn the summoning circle for him and had memorized the entire process after doing it once. In Erasure lies retreat. 4 retreat arrays were inscribed, then enclosed with a summoning circle. The sequence had to be flawless. Tenkai Shiomi extended his left hand, engraved with the command spell, and began chanting, its foundation is silver and iron. Its base is stone and the grand contract. My ancestor. My teacher. Is Skathak. He had included his mentor's name in the chant to strengthen the summoned heroic spirit's recognition, ensuring the summoning of a servant with high potential. A similar precedent was seen in the Tasaka family, who would invoke the name of the wizard marshal. Zelrech Schwenorg. During their rituals, as he was their founder's teacher. Raise a wall before the wind's descent. Close the 4 cardinal gates. Emerge from the crown. Circle endlessly at the 3-pronged road to the kingdom. Seal. 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 Repeat the sealing 5 times. When filled, discard it. Proclamation. Your body shall rest under mine, and my fate shall lie with your blade. If you heed the call of the Holy Grail, if you accept this will in reason, then respond. Here is my oath. I am the one who shall accomplish all good in the world. I am the one who shall commit all evil in the world. Yet you shall shroud your eyes in chaos, and serve me. You, imprisoned in the cage of madness. I am the one who holds your key. You, bound by the 3 great words for 7 days. Come forth from the wheel of restraint, guardian of the scales. The moment the chant ended, Shiomi felt mana surge violently through his body. It was a cold, searing pain. Magic circuits writhing within him, a torment every magus had to endure. His vision dimmed as the runes engraved on his body drew in mana from the atmosphere to fuel the ritual. By now, his body had shed all traces of human functionality, becoming a component in a miracle. A circuit linking the spiritual and material realms. The rapid surge of mana made his body tremble in pain, but compared to the merciless training he endured in the land of shadows under Skathak, it was nothing. Behind him, Sakura stood with her hands clasped, nervously watching the descent of the summoned spirit. Wind and lightning howled around them. The pressure was so intense she had to shield her eyes with her hands. At the center of the storm, the summoning circle blazed with brilliance. The magical pathway finally connected to another world, and from within the blinding light emerged a figure wreathed in deep blue and jet black. Servant, berserker. I answer the summoning. You over there, Magus. So you're the one who called me. Who summoned me? A voice rang out, icy cold and almost mechanical, cutting through the mist and radiance. Just as Shiomi was reeling from the shock that a berserker could speak with such clarity and reason, the servant seemed equally stunned. Clack. 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 Berserker stepped through the mist and closed the distance toward Tenkai Shiomi. She was a woman, about 170 centimeters tall, with long, cascading silver hair and an elegant face. The tips of her hair shimmered faintly blue, matching the hue of her eyes. A flicker of emotion, perhaps surprise, flashed through those frozen lake-like eyes before vanishing. She stared at him in silence. "That's right. I'm the magus who summoned you." Not understanding her reaction, Shiomi chalked it up to some unique condition caused by her berserker nature. He raised his left hand and revealed the command spell. "I am your master." The next moment, she reached out and lightly touched the command spell on the back of his hand, moving so fast that Shiomi didn't even have time to react. If she'd chosen to betray him right then, a single swing could have severed the very hand bearing the command spell. As that thought crossed his mind, she withdrew her hand. "I'm the servant who'll assist you in this Holy Grail war. You could say it's fate." The surprise in her voice had faded, replaced by playful ease. With an air of teasing, she gently cupped Shiomi's chin. He didn't know what she was after, but one thing was clear. He was being toyed with. Narrowing his eyes, Shiomi used the system's authority as a master to identify her true name. And the moment he saw it, he froze. "Well then, let's forget my earlier behavior. Time for a proper introduction. My name is Morgan, the Fairy Queen. I offer my strength as your servant." "You're who?" Even though he'd just confirmed it, Shiomi still couldn't believe what he was hearing. Chapter 3, Master and Servant. After the summoning ceremony ended, Shiomi carried Sakura back to her room to sleep. Though she was already 7, Shiomi wasn't a strict parent, and Sakura had grown a bit spoiled because of it. He had to scoop her up and tuck her into bed himself. Fortunately, just experiencing the overwhelming surge of magical energy during the ritual had exhausted her. The pressure alone was enough to drain her completely. She didn't even have the energy to ask for a Norse mythology bedtime story before falling fast asleep. Once he confirmed both Sakura and Karin were sound asleep, Shiomi stepped back out. After the ritual concluded, Berserker Morgan had returned to spiritual form. With the summoning now stabilized, he could feel the bond between master and servant had properly formed, the mana flow between them fully established. Following that connection, Shiomi found Morgan in his study. She had already materialized, lounging on the sofa with a book in hand, idly flipping through its pages. "You're even less like a magus than I expected," Morgan remarked without looking up. Shiomi shrugged casually. "To a magus from the Age of Gods, modern magi like us probably don't even register. I bet the only one who'd catch your attention is the king of magecraft. The one who built the entire magus system from the ground up, right?" "That wasn't sarcasm," Morgan said, closing the book and raising her gaze to him. "There's too much warmth in you for a magus. Most magi, in pursuit of the path of magecraft, gradually shed conventional human ethics and morality during their training, adopting a worldview and set of rules that stood completely apart from the mundane world. Come on. All I did was put a kid to bed. Isn't that a bit much praise?" Shiomi shook his head and sat down across from her. Morgan lowered her eyes, almost musing to herself. "But thanks to that, I understand your personality a little better." "A little better?" Shiomi was taken aback. Then he recalled her odd behavior right after she materialized. Those moments of silence, the curious reaction. And he gave her a cautious look. Servants were avatars of heroic spirits, the highest-ranking familiars summoned only during the Holy Grail War. Their mysteries often transcended even the domain of magecraft itself. Drawn forth from the throne of heroes, they crossed time to descend into this era in response to a magus's call. The Holy Grail granted them enough era-appropriate knowledge to function in the modern world. But it never included information about their masters. "I've been wondering ever since we introduced ourselves," Shiomi said. "You seemed a little off when you saw me. Were you disappointed or something?" What lay ahead was a brutal clash. 7 servants, each bound to a different master, fighting to the death. A true war. Which meant trust between master and servant was critical. Any misunderstanding or discord could prove fatal. And Tenkai Shiomi had no intention of dying here. That's why he chose to confront Morgan and clear the air before anything went sideways. But Morgan's reaction was far from expected. She let out a low, amused laugh. "No, it's nothing. I was just a little surprised." Morgan raised her hand, palm facing up, as if she could hold Shiomi in her grasp. "If the one who summoned me were just a typical modern magus, I wouldn't have thought much of it." Shiomi looked mildly surprised. "But I doubt the other masters in this Holy Grail War realize it yet. One of their opponents wields magecraft from the Age of Gods," Morgan said. After the initial surprise, Shiomi relaxed. "Impressive. You saw through the essence of what I am as a magus." He stretched lazily. "If you can see that clearly, it'll make strategizing a lot easier moving forward." Morgan maintained that distant, unreadable smile. She wasn't flattered by his praise, nor did she seem offended by his laid-back attitude. "More importantly, what about you?" she asked. "What do you mean?" Xiaomi had just been about to head back to his room to sleep, but the question made him sink back into the sofa. "You don't seem very curious about my identity," Morgan pointed out. Tenkai Xiaomi had been surprised, sure, when the berserker he summoned turned out not to be some legendary warrior famed for sheer might, but rather a heroic spirit more akin to a magus. But beyond that, he hadn't dwelled on it. "Well, how should I put this?" Xiaomi crossed his arms with an awkward look. "I know how servant classifications work in the Holy Grail War. A single heroic spirit can manifest under different classes depending on the side of their legend being drawn from. By all rights, the Fairy Queen Morgan should be best suited to the caster class. But who knows? Maybe there's a reason I don't know about that allowed you to appear as a berserker." SHHH. Morgan vanished into spirit form, then rematerialized right beside him on the sofa. Xiaomi flinched, shoulders tensing up. "Then explain it," Morgan said without turning to look at him. Her voice was calm, but a heavy pressure emanated from her, bearing down on him. "Judging by your reaction, it's not like you haven't thought about it." Xiaomi let out a hiss through his teeth. Sigh. "It's not much. I just know the King Arthur legends pretty well. I've told bedtime stories to those two kids. Arthurian tales, Greek myths, Norse myths, even a few from the Americas. I've told whatever I could. Can't exactly tell stories properly if I don't know them myself, right?" "Oh?" Morgan kept probing. After all, the death of King Arthur, the breakup of the Round Table, the fall of Britain. All of that is tied to you, isn't it? Xiaomi wasn't fond of bringing up people's past mistakes. Especially when he wasn't sure how Morgan herself felt about those events. Was she proud? Bitter? Regretful? In any case, to cause that kind of outcome, having a little madness inside wouldn't be all that surprising, right? He gave a sheepish smile. Legends were legends. If Morgan, as a servant, ever chose to betray him, he had countermeasures in place. "That kind of flippant answer suits you," Morgan replied at last. "Happy now? Let's leave it there." Xiaomi stood from the couch. Having a stunning woman like Morgan so close made him feel more on edge than anything. "Heading to the battlefield? Then bring me my magic lance," Morgan said, raising a hand. A weapon. Part staff, part spear, part sword. Leaned against a nearby chair. "Wait a second. Aren't I the master here?" Xiaomi stumbled, thinking he must have misheard. "You are. So what?" Morgan responded coolly. "I offer you my strength to fight. In return, you should fulfill your duties as a master. Mana alone isn't enough." Then she stood. "Have you decided who our first target will be?" "Who said we're heading to battle already?" Xiaomi twitched. "All 7 servants haven't even been summoned yet. It's not time. Don't get ahead of yourself." Then, before she could finish, Xiaomi waved a hand and walked out of the study. "It's late. Get some rest." "Do as you like, Morgan." Morgan watched in mild surprise as her master disappeared beyond the door. After a while, she returned to her seat and picked up the book she'd barely started, The Legend of King Arthur. This lazy, carefree demeanor. It's hard to believe he's the same tyrant who waged that endless war against me for 2,000 years. The Fairy Queen's wistful murmur faded into the quiet of the study. No one else heard it. And no one could answer what it meant. Chapter 4, Morning at the Xiaomi house. It was the land beneath an eternal twilight sky. Someone once said that to Morgan. "Let's begin our war." Then blood stained the earth, arrows pierced blooming flowers. Iron hooves trampled fields of grain, and flesh was churned into mud, returning as nourishment to the land. Morgan opened her eyes from a dream. She was in the Xiaomi family's study. Servants didn't require sleep. As long as their master was competent enough to provide a steady, sufficient flow of mana, these high-level familiars could continue fighting without rest. But if the mana supply was lacking, servants would need to restore it the human way. Through rest and food. Tenkai Xiaomi was a magus so gifted it bordered on excessive. With his mana alone, Morgan had no need for sleep. Even so, she had dozed off in the study with a thick book in her arms, slipping into a dream she hadn't had in a long time. One that felt distant and faded. This was her first morning since descending into the Holy Grail War as a servant. According to the war's conventions, combat typically occurred at night. Daytime was usually reserved for ambushes, recon, and subtle skirmishes between masters and servants. What was her master doing now? With that thought, she made her way to the living room. A perfectly ordinary morning. A peaceful, domestic scene. Xiaomi was bustling around in the kitchen preparing breakfast. Sakura stood on a stool nearby, watching and learning how to cook. Simple life skills far removed from magecraft. Karan sat on the couch, quietly watching a morning program. She held the remote but didn't change the channel. On screen, the news played. Something unsettling for children. Next, an update on the string of bizarre murders in Fuiuki City. At all three known crime scenes, mysterious symbols resembling magic circles were drawn using the victim's blood. What remains unclear is the meaning behind these circles. Today, we've invited a criminal psychologist with expertise in the field to discuss possible explanations. Serial murders, connected by shared crime scene traits. No matter the era or the world, such things were inevitable. Morgan instinctively folded her arms, eyes cool and distant as she watched the scholar on TV offer vague theories. "What do you think?" came Shiomi's voice. "Who knows? It's impossible to say," Morgan replied offhandedly. She found no appeal in this type of senseless, self-indulgent killing. Shiomi gave a helpless smile. "It's not safe, that much is true. But compared to the war we're fighting at night, which is more dangerous? What are you worried about?" Morgan picked up on the weight behind his words. "My kids," Shiomi answered without hesitation. Morgan often forgot. Her master was a father to 2 children, even if only by adoption. He looked like he was barely in his 20s, yet he was raising a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old girl. To most people, that alone would be cause for suspicion. But not to Morgan. As they talked, her gaze drifted to the dining table. She paused in surprise. There were 4 bowls of miso soup and 4 full breakfasts set out. "I know servants don't need to eat when mana is sufficient. It's terribly inefficient, after all," Shiomi said with a smile. "But since you're here, you're a guest. So I guess I just prepared 1 extra by habit. If it feels unnecessary, just leave it. I'll clean up after I drop Sakura and Karan off at school." Morgan didn't refuse. She sat down and joined them for breakfast as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She didn't speak a word throughout the meal, silently watching Shiomi's every move. During breakfast, he kept chatting with Sakura and Karan. Sakura responded sweetly to everything he said, while Karan, now and then, would blurt out a sarcastic comment far beyond her age, leaving Shiomi red-faced and flustered. After the meal, just as he said, Shiomi drove Karan to kindergarten and Sakura to elementary school. Morgan could have stayed behind or wandered on her own, but instead, she got in the car and went along. When they arrived at the kindergarten, the teacher mistook Morgan for Karan's new mother. And Shiomi had to spend quite a while explaining otherwise. There's really no need to explain. Letting a mistake slide can be perfectly convenient, don't you think? Or, does being called my husband make you uneasy? Morgan leaned against the passenger side window, teasing Shiomi as he drove. "Did you wake up just to mess with me, Morgan?" Shiomi's mouth twitched. Privately, he preferred not to address her by class. It was hard to associate someone as composed and rational as Amigas from the Age of Gods with the title of Berserker. "The Holy Grail War lasts no more than 2 weeks. Even if we win, we'll go our separate ways after claiming the Grail," he said with an exasperated smile. "I plan to keep living in Fuyuki until those 2 kids grow up." Morgan gave him a sidelong glance. "The Holy Grail. Come to think of it, I haven't asked yet. Why are you even in this war? Why do you want the Grail? Does it matter?" Shiomi didn't answer right away. "It does. The ones who seek the Grail are usually people dissatisfied with the world." "You don't look like the kind who'd be chasing it," Morgan said. Shiomi nodded casually. "Let's say I want to reach the root. Satisfied now?" "A lie that transparent isn't even worth saying," Morgan said, somewhere between a warning and a sigh. "Then what about you?" Shiomi shot back. "What wish do you want granted by the Grail?" The car was quiet for a moment before Morgan let out a short, dry laugh. Nice deflection. And with that, they dropped the topic of personal wishes. "But..." Shiomi shifted the conversation. "What is it? You really stand out dressed like that. I think we should pick up some new clothes, maybe change our look a little." "Sure, the war is supposed to happen at night, but things always spiral. People go berserk, day or night, and nobody cares about staying hidden." "That's a reasonable suggestion. So, what kind of outfit are you thinking of?" Morgan accepted the idea without resistance. "I know a place. Bit upscale, but the owner's a friend. He won't even blink at how you dress." Shiomi turned the steering wheel and the car veered down a different road. "Relax. I may not like turning into spirit form, but if it avoids unnecessary complications, I'll do it. That's part of a servant's duty." Morgan had already seen through Shiomi's careful maneuvering. How he deliberately avoided saying or doing anything that might cause conflict between master and servant. And offered her reassurance. Well, that's a relief. Chapter 5, The Land of Fuyuki. Morgan suited modern clothing even better than expected. So much so that Tenkai Shiomi found himself momentarily flustered when he saw her. Noticing his reaction, Morgan was clearly pleased. "So, what now?" she asked, her tone light and amused. "Since the Holy Grail War hasn't officially begun due to the servants not yet assembling, is my master planning to parade a stunning beauty like me around town to show me off?" Even if it's true, most people wouldn't call themselves a stunning beauty out loud, Shiomi muttered with a weary sigh. He would have much preferred to head home, check the boundary field around the house, tend to final preparations, and await the war's opening when all the servants were summoned. But there was something more pressing today. Steeling himself, he pushed aside his fatigue. Sorry to disappoint, but I do need to take you around Fuiuki today. It's not for show. So this is about helping me familiarize myself with the city for any situations that may arise later? Exactly. After leaving the boutique district where they had bought clothes, Shiomi drove while explaining everything he'd learned over the past 2 years about the Holy Grail War. Fuiuki is an exceptional spiritual land. It has a spiritual vein second only to the one under the Ozaki family's jurisdiction. While it's not enough to reach the root, it comes very close. That's why Magi have lived here for generations. As they passed the Fuiuki Civic Center, Shiomi spoke with a calm tone. When the Holy Grail War reaches its final phase, the Grail will descend at the strongest point in Fuiuki's spiritual network. The past 3 wars ended at the Tosaka residence, Fuiuki Church, and the underground cavern beneath Ritu Temple on Mount Ensu. I already pointed out the first 2 locations to you in Mama Town. The Civic Center we just passed could theoretically host a Grail descent too, but it's never happened. The Holy Grail didn't provide this kind of information to servants. They only knew it could grant wishes. And that was enough to answer their master's summons. So what's the point of telling me this? Servants don't need to know, Morgan remarked. Shiomi shook his head. Maybe not, but even though you were summoned under the Berserker class, you're still a magus by nature. For strategy and planning, it helps to understand the bigger picture. He pulled over. From Morgan's seat, she could see a flight of stone steps across the street. At the top lay the last spiritual site Shiomi wanted her to inspect. Mount Enzo? Ritu Temple. There's a barrier here, Morgan said, standing at the base of the steps and scanning the surroundings. According to old accounts, long before the Grail system was formalized, a high-ranking monk created a spiritual barrier here using secret techniques. It's highly specialized. So much so that even servants, despite being advanced spirit forms, can't just pass through. They have to enter via the front gate. Shiomi started up the stairs. Morgan followed closely behind. With each step, her senses grew sharper. Spiritually speaking, Mount Enzu's ley line far outclassed the others. Her intuition as a magus told her as much. Shiomi hadn't said a word. Probably assuming she'd notice it herself. And she did. The sensation became clearer with every step. When they reached the main gate of Ritu Temple, Morgan stopped. Master, go on ahead into the temple. I want to look around nearby, she said in a commanding tone. Something bothering you? Yes and no. With that, Morgan shifted into spirit form and vanished from Shiomi's side. She reappeared at the back of the temple, where a large pond rested. Directly beneath it lay Fuiuki's highest grade spiritual vein. Right beneath here, huh? Morgan dissolved again into spirit form and ascended the mountain. It didn't take long for her to find the entrance. The mountain was cloaked in a magical illusion. One that let her hand pass through like mist. An invisible veil disguised the true path. This is it, she thought to herself. The location of the Greater Grail. Shiomi had never mentioned it. Either he hadn't discovered the exact spot, or he didn't think it mattered. What concerned him was the Lesser Grail. But from Morgan's perspective as a magus, the Holy Grail War system itself warranted scrutiny. If she wanted to understand what troubled her about it, she needed to analyze the Greater Grail directly. As she prepared to step into the underground cavern, the sound of wings flapping nearby made her frown. Insects. In the dead of winter, no insects should be active. Swish. Without even turning her head, Morgan summoned a blade of magic that materialized out of thin air and sliced the winged creature apart. The remains fell to the ground. Stop skulking in the shadows, Worm Magus, Morgan said coldly. Don't think that just because your true body isn't here, I can't curse you to death. As if in response, a sinister chuckle echoed through the trees. An old, hunched man emerged from the forest's darkness, leaning heavily on a cane. He. I didn't expect a servant to try and seize control of the Greater Grail before the war even begins. What are you? Caster Glass? The old man stood beneath the shade, his voice rasping like a snake slithering through tall grass. Morgan turned slowly to face him. So it's you. The head of the Mita family, one of the original 3 families who created the Holy Grail system. And now so degraded, you can't even produce a proper magus. Don't get cocky, you're just a servant, the old man snapped, his sunken eyes flashing. You've clung to life with magecraft alone, and look at what it's turned you into. Morgan raised her hand. I had half a mind to show some respect to the family who engineered this system, but clearly, that's unnecessary. With no chant, no ritual, just a gathering of mana, Light bullets shot forth like rounds from an automatic rifle. The old man's body was shredded in an instant, collapsing to the ground and crumbling into dust. I'm not foolish enough to face off against a servant directly, let alone in Magecraft. His voice echoed through the trees even as his body disappeared. Take the Greater Grail if you like, but don't think that means you've already won. His mockery barely registered with Morgan. Without a glance back, she stepped through the illusionary veil concealing the entrance to the underground cavern. After all, Morgan had never intended to claim the Greater Grail as her own nor use it as a base. Chapter 6. The visitor. Morgan emerged once more from the underground cavern, her expression slightly grim. She had indeed reached the location of the Greater Grail. The cavern housing the Greater Grail's magic circle did have a barrier designed to isolate servants from spirit forms, but to Morgan, those tricks were no better than children's games. However, after examining the Greater Grail, Morgan confirmed that the circle could adjust Fuiuki's land to make it suitable for spiritual descent and initiating the Holy Grail War. But she also uncovered a troubling fact. Something this contaminated is useless. Even as a wish-granting machine. Morgan came to a conclusion. It was already late outside. She hadn't expected the investigation to take so long. Returning to the courtyard of Rita Temple, she found that Tenkai Shiomi was no longer there. Morgan briefly scanned the connection between them. The monolink remained, but his presence had vanished from both Rita Temple and Mount Gensu. Where have you gone, Master? To leave your servant behind and act on your own. Even if the Holy Grail War hasn't started yet, that's far too careless. Morgan reached out through the monolink to contact Shiomi's consciousness. Sorry. You were taking longer than I thought. It's already after school, so I went to pick up Sakura and Karin. You can make it back on your own, right? Shiomi offered an honest apology for leaving Morgan behind. Hearing his response, Morgan let her anger go. Her master was, in every sense, a magus far too human. Almost to the point of being unqualified. Understanding the situation, Morgan made her way back to the Shiomi residence in Mama Town on her own. She didn't bother spirit forming her way inside. Instead, she opened a gate and entered as if returning home. Unexpectedly, there was a visitor. Turning around the porch, Morgan spotted the guest through the glass. It was a young man, likely not yet 30, his gentle smile tinged with a trace of exhaustion as he spoke with Shiomi and Sakura. He seemed to know Sakura. Looks like everything's fine. Seems I worried for nothing, the man said. Even if we're caught up in the Holy Grail War, taking care of a couple of kids isn't that hard for me. Shiomi ruffled Sakura's hair. Besides, Sakura is extremely talented. As a beginner magus, she could probably beat even Mr. Karaya. Sakura gave a proud yet shy smile at the praise. Of course, the man. Karaya. Responded, his smile slightly bitter. Just then, Morgan's footsteps as she entered the living room from the porch cut the conversation short. Startled by the sudden appearance of a stunning woman, Karaya froze for a second, instinctively assuming she was someone from the Shiomi household. And this is? He asked politely. Shiomi narrowed his eyes and smiled to mask the awkwardness. My wife. Really? Karaya was clearly surprised. When did that happen? Just recently, Shiomi answered vaguely. Fortunately, Karaya didn't press further, nor did he realize that Morgan was a servant, not a normal human. He chatted with Shiomi a bit more, left a gift for Sakura, and said he'd soon be leaving Japan for work and wouldn't be able to visit again before then. So, you finally made up your mind? Morgan asked with a sly look as Shiomi returned from seeing Karaya off. She was referring to how he had introduced her as his wife. It was just something to say. What else was I supposed to do? Shiomi sighed. You're the one who barged in. If you'd just gone into spirit form, he wouldn't have noticed anything. He's not even a magus. Morgan smiled faintly, ignoring the complaint. Who was he? Karayamatu. Before I adopted Sakura, when she was still with the Tasaka family, he used to look after her and her sister, Shiomi explained. Apparently, he had some sort of relationship with Aoi Tasaka when they were young. Matu. Morgan recalled the old magus manipulating insects she had encountered earlier that day. Don't worry about it. The Matu family's mostly fallen into ruin by now. Mr. Karaya is the only one with any potential, but he gave up magecraft and lives far removed from it. He's just an ordinary person. Not even a master. With that, Shiomi headed to the kitchen to prepare dinner. After the meal came the usual magecraft lesson. Sakura had already gone to the workshop to wait and review. During that time, Morgan briefly told Shiomi about encountering the head of the Mita family near the Great Hollow and described the situation there. But deliberately left out the most critical detail: the Grail had been contaminated. She still didn't know Shiomi's true reason for joining the Holy Grail War. Whether he needed it as a wish-granting machine, or if, like the founders of the Fuiuki Grail system, he sought the root. During their conversation, Morgan tried to probe again, but Shiomi deflected as vaguely as before. So, Morgan decided it would be best to hold off for now on this potentially unstable matter and observe him more closely during this period. If there's nothing else, I'll head to the workshop to teach Sakura. Just as Shiomi was about to wrap up the conversation, the phone rang. He answered, exchanged a few brief words, then hung up. That wasn't just a casual call, Morgan remarked. Yeah, the church's overseer just informed me. The caster class servant has been summoned, Shiomi said, his tone turning serious. Looks like the Holy Grail War will officially begin tonight, Morgan said with a quiet chuckle. Shiomi was already making his way toward the workshop. For now, let's hold our position and observe how things unfold. During his time in Fuyuki, he had planted surveillance familiars across the city. Especially around the Tasaka and Mita households, and the Innsburn castle on the outskirts, the bases of the three great families. Now, he was about to activate those familiars to see which factions would ignite the opening clash of the Holy Grail War. Dad. Seeing Shiomi rush in, Sakura could tell tonight's magecraft lesson was off. Sorry, Sakura. Lessons are on hold for a while. Go back to your room and get some rest. I've got things to handle. Shiomi leaned down and gently comforted the girl sitting in the chair. Sakura nodded obediently and left the room. I forgot to mention earlier. Her attribute is imaginary numbers, isn't it? Morgan asked suddenly. Shiomi, busy activating the familiars, nodded. It's a rare one. Why? You can't teach her anything about imaginary magecraft, Morgan said with a faint, confident smile. Since the Holy Grail War won't be non-stop, if there's time, let me teach her. Shiomi hesitated for a few seconds. Then, with a wave of his hand, the familiars' shared visions lit up the workshop like floating monitor windows formed from glowing runes. I'll think about it. That was his reply to Morgan. Chapter 7, A Suspiciously Complicated First Battle. What do you think, Morgan? Using the familiars he'd placed throughout Fuyuki City, Denkai Shiomi quickly caught sight of the first battlefield. It was the Tasaka residence, perched on a hillside in Mama Town. Under orders from his master, Assassin launched a surprise attack on the mansion. Long fortified with over 20 layers of detection and defensive barriers, resembling a military stronghold. Yet, Assassin skillfully slipped past the barriers. But just as he attempted to dismantle the foundation of the first layer, he was instantly struck down by Archer, the servant summoned by Tokiomi Tasaka. The entire engagement happened so quickly that Shiomi barely had time to switch between his familiar's viewpoints. All he managed to catch was a distant glimpse of that imposing golden figure. The opening battle ended with Assassin's swift retreat. Shiomi certainly wasn't the only master who had witnessed the first clash of the Holy Grail War. He froze the projected image transmitted back by the familiar, leaned against the desk in the workshop, and turned to ask his servant. A pretty hopeless gap in power, huh? Morgan seated herself gracefully in the chair by the desk, crossed her legs, and leaned back with elegance. To an outside observer, the closeness between them might have suggested something intimate. But since no one else was around, it didn't matter. Judging from the attack patterns, every weapon that pierced Assassin looked like a noble phantasm, Shiomi said, arms crossed. Normally, servants in the Holy Grail War only possess one noble phantasm. Exceptional ones might have 2 or 3. But sheer number wasn't the key. What really mattered was the nature and rank of the noble phantasms. A noble phantasm could be a weapon, a concept, an ability, or a unique technique. Or maybe all those weapons that appeared to be many were actually manifestations of a single noble phantasm, Shiomi mused aloud. Take the Gaibolg held by Skathak, Queen of the Land of Shadows. Its prototype can split into countless forms to strike, and when needed, it can even transform into a 3-section staff, a short blade, or a longbow. At that, Shiomi found himself drifting back to the timeless days he spent in the Land of Shadows. Surviving in a place teeming with lurking spirits and undead, he'd been discovered by Skathak during one of her patrols. She took interest in him and made him her student. Recalling that brutal, hellish combat training, even after enduring it, still sent a chill down his spine. Fortunately, thank the heavens, that person cannot die. Which also means she can't be summoned into this Holy Grail War as a servant. You seem very familiar with the Queen of the Land of Shadows, Master, Morgan remarked, a faint trace of discontent in her voice. Snapping back to the present, Shiomi figured it was likely Morgan's pride as a servant that made her bristle at the idea of her master using other heroic spirits as benchmarks. It's nothing, Shiomi answered vaguely, not wanting to divulge his past. I did my homework for the Holy Grail War, that's all. Morgan studied him quietly for a moment, as if trying to read something in his face. Then she looked away, wearing her usual aloof smile as her gaze returned to the recording of the first battle. Didn't expect Assassin to be knocked out so soon. Seems those assassins are even more worthless than I thought. It wasn't an unfair judgment. Among the 7 classes in the Holy Grail War, Assassin and Caster were generally regarded as the weakest. That's because the Assassin class could only summon one of the various incarnations of Husanai Saba from the history of the Hashash insect. That's not necessarily true. If the first Husanai Saba responds, then the outcome of this Holy Grail War is already decided in advance, Shiomi countered. A mere magus wanting a response from that old man? That's just arrogance, Morgan sneered. Besides, if the master can even come up with such an idea, he must know it's impossible. You're right, Shiomi admitted, not denying he was joking. As for Caster, considering that the 3 knight classes and even rider possess magic resistance, summoning even an excellent Caster class servant would still face a disadvantage in terms of compatibility. However, Shiomi found himself genuinely curious. What would have happened if Morgan had manifested as a Caster rather than a berserker? But that was purely hypothetical and not worth discussing for now. Still, don't you think everything's going a little too smoothly? Shiomi looked Morgan in the eyes, voicing his doubts directly. Morgan asked him to explain. What makes you say that? From the moment Assassin appeared and tried to break the barrier, to the instant Archer counterattacked. It all happened too fast. It's like they knew ahead of time and had an ambush ready. Plus, Assassin has the class skill presence concealment. Getting caught so easily seems way too sloppy, Shiomi said, listing his thoughts. It can't be that Archer has some kind of presence detection ability, right? We don't even know Archer's true name. How could we possibly know what abilities he actually has? Morgan didn't immediately agree but seemed intrigued by the discussion. Shiomi raised an eyebrow. Morgan had a point, but that just led to another question. In that case, why did Archer bother to reveal himself at all? Shiomi pointed out. If he really had the ability to detect Assassin's approach and set up a flawless ambush, then the best strategy would have been to keep the servant hidden. That way, no one would gain any intel. So that only leaves one possibility. He raised a finger, a confident smile forming on his lips. This was a staged fight. Go on, Morgan nodded. It was a prearranged fake match. Assassin's master and Tokiomi Tasaka worked together to stage this so that Assassin's defeat and withdrawal would seem perfectly reasonable. Shiomi snapped his fingers, a crisp sound ringing out. The smile in Morgan's eyes shifted into something more subtle. To join the Holy Grail War in pursuit of an omnipotent wish-granting device, only to lose and retreat so easily. Aren't you oversimplifying things? Who knows? After all, Assassin's master is Tokiomi Tasaka's student. Shiomi presented another piece of intel he'd gathered on the masters. At last, Morgan's expression changed. It seems this Holy Grail War in the Far East might be more entertaining than expected. Either way, the Holy Grail War has officially begun. It's time for us to act too. Shiomi rose from his desk and headed toward the door of the workshop. Just before stepping onto the stairs, he turned back. About what you said earlier. Teaching Sakura Magecraft. If you have the time later, I'd really appreciate it. After all, the better the teacher, the better the results. Chapter 8, Methods of Greeting. This is the data on the masters participating in this Holy Grail War. Take a look. The next day, while driving through the streets of Fuiuki, Denkai Shiomi handed Morgan a stack of documents from the driver's seat. Shouldn't you be giving me information on the servants instead? Morgan took the documents and started flipping through them, but voiced her doubts. You make it sound so easy. That kind of intel isn't just lying around, Shiomi muttered. Besides, if we want to win the Holy Grail War, it'd be more efficient to target the masters first. Morgan glanced at him from the corner of her eye. Every magus in this war has probably thought of that. It's nothing special. Ever heard of Tianji's horse racing strategy? Shiomi smiled. Match your worst horse against their best, your best against their average, and your average against their worst. 2 wins out of 3. Morgan raised an eyebrow. So you want me to take out the masters while you stall the servants? That's a pretty reckless plan. My husband hasn't even entered battle, and you're already throwing in the towel. I told you, it was just a figure of speech. Don't take it seriously. Shiomi nearly slammed the brakes as they crossed the Mayan River Bridge. If he had, he really might have become the first master to be eliminated. By a car crash, no less. I don't take orders from anyone, not even a master. Treating you as my husband is already the most I'm willing to concede. Morgan's tone was calm, but clearly teasing. Shiomi didn't know Morgan all that well, but he could tell this fairy queen wasn't someone who'd stay subordinate to others for long. He could only silently accept the way she chose to treat her master. Not happy with that? How could I be? Shiomi gave a dry laugh. In the end, you never intended to treat your servant like a mere familiar, did you? Morgan pointed out. Most magi, to conceal their servant's true name and emphasize the hierarchy between them, would refer to their servants by class. But up to now, Xiaomi had never once called Morgan berserker. No matter how advanced a familiar might be, they're still heroes whose names were passed down through history and legend. I have nothing but respect for beings like that, Xiaomi said honestly, a sharp smile playing on his lips. Of course, if we're talking about gods, that's another matter. Morgan's eyes widened slightly in surprise. Just then, the car passed over the Fuiuki Bridge and entered the modern city district. The scenery shifted abruptly. From traditional streets to a forest of steel and concrete. Morgan wasn't particularly interested in modern cities, but she didn't mind sightseeing like this, riding in a car. As they stopped at an intersection waiting for the light to change, Morgan suddenly held her breath, staring intently at a black sedan slowly pulling up to the curb. Noticing her change in demeanor, Xiaomi turned his attention to the car too. Suppressing his mana, he relied purely on sight to assess the situation. A blonde woman, barely over 150 centimeters tall, stepped out of the car. Dressed in a sharp black suit, she carried herself with such poise that the masculine attire only enhanced her elegance. A perfect image of a refined beauty in men's clothing. That's Saber? Xiaomi was stunned. He had only intended to take Morgan for a drive around town to get a feel for the city, but to run into the leader of the 3 night classes. Saber, the one with the highest class ranking, was more than unexpected. Morgan's reaction, however, went far beyond surprise. She recognized Saber. In the Holy Grail War, when servants recognize each other, it's a double-edged sword. It often means their true names are at risk of exposure. A Saber that Morgan recognized, and there was no mistaking it. That striking, dignified face bore an uncanny resemblance to Morgan herself, save for the difference in skin tone and hair color. Saber was reaching out to help a woman out of the car. A homunculus from the Innsburn family, Iris V. Ilvan Innsburn. Artoria Pendragon. Morgan spoke Saber's true name. No, in this age, the more common name would be Arthur Pendragon. Xiaomi narrowed his eyes. The holy sword wielder who founded the White City of Camelot. King Arthur? The Innsburn family really hit the jackpot. There had always been rumors that the appearance of certain servants in the Holy Grail War could trigger unexpected reactions. Xiaomi had dismissed them as baseless superstition. Until now. Now, even he couldn't help but believe it. They're your enemies. How to handle them is your call, Xiaomi said lightly. I just don't want any mistakes caused by a disagreement. Morgan then activated a concealment magecraft. Let's wait until nightfall. Then we'll pay them a visit. It was obvious that Saber and the Innsburn woman, who appeared to be her master, were simply sightseeing in Fuiuki during the day. Their casual wandering through the bustling new city felt nothing like a master and servant pair preparing for the Holy Grail War. Until night fell. Fuiuki Seaside Park. Artoria stood watch as Iris Veal strolled barefoot along the shoreline, letting the waves lap at her feet. All the while, Artoria kept a wary eye on their surroundings, then suddenly turned with alert precision. It's night now. There's no one else around, said the woman dressed in a sharply tailored suit, her voice serious and commanding. You've been tailing us all day. Isn't it time you showed yourself? Iris Veal stopped as well, calmly peering from behind Artoria toward the direction of her gaze. Responding to Artoria's call, a servant materialized from spiritual form. When the figure became clear, both Iris Veal and Artoria were visibly stunned. Though their reasons were different. She has the same face as Saber. Iris Veal gasped, covering her mouth in shock. Even with preparations for the Holy Grail War, this was far beyond anything they expected. Artoria's shock ran even deeper. Sister. Is seeing me really that surprising, Artoria? Morgan, still clad in modern attire, spoke with a mocking glint in her eye. Such a strong reaction. I'm flattered. Saber's sister. That means you're... Iris Veal suddenly realized. Artoria snapped out of her daze and glared sharply at Morgan. If we're both servants in this Holy Grail War, then a battle between us is inevitable, she said, raising her guard. Even if you're my sister, I won't back down. Unlike Artoria, who was on high alert, Morgan remained relaxed, which only deepened Iris Veal's unease. Be careful, Saber. Her master still hasn't shown up. And I can't sense any presence nearby. Unfortunately, my master is a bit of a softie. Still busy trying to tuck a child into bed at a time like this, Morgan said with a playful wink. Then what are you here for? Artoria asked. She could clearly sense that 2 presences had followed her during the day, but as evening approached, only one remained. Morgan gave a graceful smile. When was the last time we met like this? I don't really remember. After I inherited the throne, I was constantly at war, managing the kingdom. You rarely ever came before me, Artoria said plainly. Morgan looked at her with a gaze that wavered between sympathy and derision. And in the end, the Britain you fought so hard to unify. still fell apart. Hit where it hurt most, Artoria furrowed her brows, staring hard at her sister. After all, the fall of Britain and the disappearance of the White City were closely tied to Morgan. Yet Artoria never blamed anyone. She only blamed herself. For not being strong enough to be the king her people needed. She always knew that Britain was destined to fall, but she had hoped its end would be peaceful. Not drowned in flames and war. That's why I'm here. To participate in the Holy Grail War as a servant, Artoria said firmly. What about you? You don't need to know, you wretched red dragon. As she spoke, Morgan's outfit transformed. Mana swirled around her, and as the light faded, she now wore the familiar attire Artoria knew. Only this time, her face was unveiled. In her hand was a long wand shaped like a lance, its blade aimed directly at Artoria. Just as I thought. Without hesitation, Artoria accepted the battle her sister had brought. In an instant, her sleek black suit vanished, replaced by magic-woven armor. She understood all too well. She and Morgan were fated to clash. They were utterly incompatible. Chapter 9, Morgan vs. Artoria. Something felt wrong. That was Artoria's first, instinctive reaction. In her understanding, her sister, the fairy queen of Britannia, Morgan, was a magecraft prodigy, a genius who could stand shoulder to shoulder with Merlin, the magus of flowers. But that only applied to magecraft. Even with A-rank instinct and A-rank magic resistance, Artoria never considered those class advantages reliable when facing Morgan. So the moment Morgan made her move, Artoria didn't hesitate. She unleashed her mana, instantly closed the already short distance of less than 10 meters, and went for a decisive blow, aiming to take her down in one strike. But not only did Morgan block the blow from Artoria's invisible sword, she also countered with a sweeping strike of her magic spear, skillfully deflecting Artoria's slash and reopening the gap between them. Artoria gripped her sword with both hands, lowered her stance, and focused all her attention on her sister. She had no memory of Morgan being this proficient in close-quarters combat. Wielding a weapon that doubled as a staff and a spear with such mastery, historically, Morgan vanished from the public eye after the fall of Britannia. As for when she died and was recorded in the Throne of Heroes, even Artoria had no idea. Did she learn spearmanship after that? Or was Morgan's class not actually caster, but lancer? That thought made Artoria glance back at Iris Veil, who stood barefoot on the cold shoreline. She wasn't Artoria's true master. Only a stand-in for the original master who refused to communicate with servants, serving as a nominal substitute. Without the Holy Grail's authority, Iris Veil had no way of discerning a servant's class. Saber, be careful. I can only support you with healing magecraft. Beyond that, Iris Veil whispered, ignoring the chill of the sea around her ankles. A swift victory isn't possible anymore. I don't even know the full extent of my sister's strength, Artoria replied calmly. You should be more worried about her magecraft. If Morgan used melee to tie Artoria down while casting magecraft to strike at Iris Veil, Artoria wouldn't be able to react in time to protect her. Already a magecraft prodigy, Morgan now displayed close combat prowess as well. Artoria was certain, as a servant, Morgan was even more formidable than she had been in life. Not going to attack? Then I'll come to you, Morgan said, gripping her spear in one hand, its shaft angled behind her. Here it comes. Artoria's instinct kicked in, and she immediately shifted into a defensive stance. Watching this unfold, Iris Veil was so stunned she almost forgot to breathe. She had thought it would be a clear victory for the sword-wielding servant. A quick, decisive close-range fight. But the surge of mana unleashed during their clash was beyond anything she had imagined. The intensity of the battle was completely out of her expectations. There was no way the impact of sword and spear alone could cause such overwhelming force. Each step gouged deep craters into the coastline. Each mist swing sent gusts of wind powerful enough to shear nearby trees clean in half. The gale roared along the beach, and the moonlit ocean, once calm like glass, began to churn. As if the ravaged, unstable shore had become an obstacle, Artoria and Morgan shifted their battleground out to sea. With the blessing of the lake fairies, Artoria could move across the water as if it were solid ground. Morgan could do the same. Once more, their weapons clashed. Sword against spear. Unleashing a shockwave that tore the ocean skyward. Water erupted into the air, crashing down moments later in a torrential downpour. Even Iris Veil on the shore was soaked through. Out on the surging sea, facing off with Morgan, Artoria's doubts only grew. That sense of wrongness was getting stronger. The servant before her was undeniably Morgan. Yet something fundamental didn't match the sister she had known. There was an elusive, distorted aura clinging to her. And then there was that spear. Its blade looked nearly identical in scale to Artoria's own sword. In other words, her sister. Is your class really Lancer? Who knows? Maybe I really am just a caster, you ever think of that? Morgan lifted her left hand. After all, I am a witch. Mana quickly gathered in her palm, forming a dark red mass of energy. She was about to cast Magecraft. Realizing this, Artoria didn't hesitate for even half a second. She stomped on the water's surface and launched herself backward at high speed. And half a second later, the spot where she had just stood erupted in a violent explosion. An instantaneous spell attack, ignoring the distance between them. So it really was Morgan. A surge of familiarity rose in Artoria's chest. If that didn't work, let's try from the inside. Clearly not expecting such a minor spell to succeed, Morgan gently placed her hand over her chest and spoke in a soft, clear voice. Servants possessed senses far beyond ordinary humans. Artoria heard every word. Blue short spears manifested around Morgan, forming a circular array. Then, without warning, they all shot inward. Toward her own body. On the shore, Iris Veal gasped and turned away, unable to bear watching Morgan get impaled. But the expected scene never came. Instead, Artoria was suddenly sent staggering backward, dropping to one knee on the sea's surface and coughing up blood. From the inside. I see. She choked out, coughing several times. Saber. Iris Veal immediately activated her healing Magecraft. The spell was effective. The severe injuries caused by the high-level spell began to regenerate rapidly. Magic resistance really is a nuisance, Morgan remarked, casually resting the back of her left index finger under her chin. Even after taking that hit, all it did was damage your internal organs. The spears that looked like they were about to pierce Morgan had been redirected by spatial transfer, emerging instead from inside Artoria. Morgan. Artoria had to seriously consider retreating now. If she took another 1 or 2 hits like that, not even Iris Veal's Magecraft would be enough to keep her standing. More importantly, if Morgan turned her spear on Iris Veal now, Artoria knew she had no means of defending against such impossibly precise offensive Magecraft. Thankfully, Morgan didn't seem interested in repeating the same spell. It would have been too dull. Even though, deep down, she knew she shared no real connection with Artoria Pendragon. Still, as long as she bore the name Morgan, she had every reason to witness the holy sword of King Arthur from proper human history. Feel honored, Artoria. I'm being serious. Morgan raised her left hand high. Blinding white light surged forth, radiating overwhelming mana. Chapter 10, No Entry Allowed. Lancer, Dirmudadub, was feeling rather frustrated. He had spent the entire day wandering the streets of Fuiuki, deliberately radiating the presence of a servant. Yet even as night fell, not a single servant had answered his silent challenge. Holding out hope that the night might still bring combat, he had deliberately chosen the Bay Warehouse district in northern Fuiuki. His master, preparing for a possible encounter, had even set up a bounded field to keep civilians out. But no one came. Just as Dirmud began to accept that he wouldn't be fighting tonight, a thunderous explosion echoed from the direction of the seaside park. Along with it came a surge of powerful mana. And the unmistakable presence of servants. It seemed that someone else had jumped into battle before even responding to his challenge. Under his master's orders, Dirmud left the warehouse district and made his way toward the seaside park. Perched atop a treetop, he could clearly see 2 female servants locked in fierce combat. What shocked him even more was how alike they looked. So alike, in fact, that Dirmud couldn't help but feel intrigued and sympathetic. If someone from his past had appeared as a servant in the Holy Grail War, he too would have asked his master to let him face them first. It's Saber and Berserker? He muttered. His master's voice came through the magical communication channel, clearly deliberating the situation. Master, that Berserker isn't just skilled in close combat. She's using powerful magecraft as well. Even Saber, with her excellent magic resistance, is struggling against her, Dirmud reported. A foe like that made his blood stir with the thrill of battle. He longed to challenge Berserker. But as a knight, interfering in a duel between servants as a third party was utterly dishonorable. It was something he simply couldn't condone. Unfortunately, his master didn't share the same scruples. That Berserker could be a real problem if we leave her be. Lancer, go assist Saber and take her down. But, my lord. Intervening like this is. Dirmud couldn't stop himself from protesting, imploring his master from the shadows. That's an order. His master's tone was cold and final. Clenching his twin spears, still wrapped in rune-etched cloth to conceal their true forms, Dirmud gritted his teeth. Even if it went against his code as a knight, he couldn't bring himself to disobey a rational command from his master. As you command, he answered, voice strained, then charged toward the battlefield. But in the next instant, an overwhelming sense of danger brought him to a halt. Out of nowhere, a vortex of pitch-black crows erupted into the air. At first, only a dozen. Within 2 seconds, their numbers swelled into the hundreds, then thousands. Their piercing cries carried an ominous weight. Then, just as suddenly, The storm of crows dispersed. Standing at its center was a young man in winter clothing. A sound strategy. But unfortunately, this path is one way only. Please turn back, Lancer. You and your master, said Tenkai Shiomi, extending a hand in a calm gesture of dismissal. The moment Diarmuid saw him, he realized this wasn't a disguised servant. It was one of the masters in the Holy Grail War. His tense posture relaxed slightly. The sudden appearance, whether through illusion or spatial transfer, was no simple feat. Whoever this was, he was no ordinary magus. But in the Holy Grail War, it was common knowledge, masters couldn't match servants in combat. Step aside. I have no wish for my spears to be stained with a master's blood, Diarmuid said, raising his weapon. The tip pointed straight at Shiomi's brow. Seeing his words had no effect, Shiomi slowly lowered his arm. Come on now, they're in the middle of a reunion. Wouldn't it be a shame to interrupt and spoil the mood? In truth, he had left the decision to Morgan herself. After taking Sakura and Karan home and settling them in, he rushed back to the scene. Watching Morgan's fight with Artoria heat up. With Morgan holding her own, Shiomi had opted to stay back and observe. What he didn't expect was for Lancer's master to try and exploit the situation by throwing their servant into the mix. Sorry, but I can't disobey my master's orders, Diarmuid replied. If you refuse to move, then I'll have no choice but to force my way through. Among all servant classes in the Holy Grail War, Lancer boasts the highest base agility, surpassing even Rider. And Diarmuid, as an exceptional Lancer, possessed an A+ rank in agility. He was confident that no modern-day magus could possibly stop him. Not with his speed. At least, that's what he believed. As he tried to dash past Tenkai Shiomi to reach the battlefield, a low sweeping kick came at him from the side. Caught completely off guard, Diarmuid barely managed to block. The force behind the strike sent him flying several meters back. Farther than where he had started. How can this be? Diarmuid muttered in disbelief. Shiomi's kick hadn't injured him, but the impact alone was enough to shake him. A human magus. Matching a servant's speed and even counter-attacking at that level. This is your chance. Kill Berserker's master, Lancer. His master's command echoed through the magical channel. Diarmuid hesitated no longer, nor did he feel any regrets. A magus who could stand against a servant. This man was not to be underestimated. But just then, Shiomi, having knocked Diarmuid back, began inscribing 4 runes around them. The Athan Gabla, Ford of the Forked Branch. No Celtic warrior could fail to recognize it. An oath of no retreat, a sacred mark that forbids fleeing or seeking survival through escape. Are you connected to the Knights of the Red Branch? Or perhaps a descendant of those warriors? Diarmuid took his stance, ready for battle. Wouldn't you like to know? Shiomi said, flicking a small stone from his fingers. Hagilitz. As he spoke the rune's name, the stone streaked past Diarmuid's cheek. And suddenly exploded, releasing an icy burst of magecraft capable of freezing everything in its path. Even with a full-strength dodge, Diarmuid couldn't avoid it completely. A thin layer of frost spread across his left arm and the spear he held, creeping all the way to his neck. Startled, Diarmuid glanced at his arm, then flexed. Mana surged, and the frost shattered. Then, he let out a hearty laugh. To meet someone with the strength to knock me back, and ruin magecraft this refined. I'm glad to have such a worthy opponent. Ugh, you're such a pain. I really don't want to fight you. Shiomi sighed. Yet even as he said that, he dropped into a ready stance. Barehanded and unflinching, completely contradicting his words. Chapter 11, 2 Battlefronts. The once calm coastal waters of Fuiuki had turned into a raging sea. Artoria's figure bobbed with the waves as she gasped for air, eyes fixed on Morgan in the distance. In life, she had never faced her sister Morgan in combat. Be it magecraft or spear techniques, Morgan's style was entirely unfamiliar to her. And in pure combat terms, Morgan was clearly the more versatile of the two. Her mastery of battlefield magecraft was so refined that even Artoria's own teacher, Merlin, might not match her in this particular domain. As Saber considered this, Morgan's voice rang out. Be honored, Artoria. I mean that. Artoria tensed, channeling every ounce of mana she had. She reinforced her internal defenses, determined not to be caught off guard by the same trick twice. Just then, the white light of mana in Morgan's hand condensed to its peak. Then shot upward and vanished into the sky. Artoria's senses went into overdrive. Saber. Above. Irisveel's anxious voice called out from the shoreline, urging her to look up. Uncertain what form the next attack would take, Artoria focused on reinforcing her defenses and keeping her eyes on Morgan. Only to momentarily neglect her surroundings. She jerked her head upward. Directly above her, the sky rippled like water tainted with ink. Deep black spreading in waves. From its center, pale blue motes of magical light began to swirl. Dense mana surged from the depths of this sky sea. A spearhead, sharp, spinning, slowly emerged from within. Danger. Artoria's instincts screamed. She instantly dispelled the invisible air that concealed her blade, revealing the radiant golden sword beneath. With all her strength, she swung upward to intercept the descending magic spear. Noble phantasm clashed against spell-forged weaponry. The violent force of the impact warped the ocean around her, creating a massive crater of roiling sea centered on her position. There was no time to release its true name. She could only meet the attack with her blade in its base form. Overwhelming mana pressed down on her, forcing her knees to bend beneath the pressure. Gritting her teeth, she held her ground and blocked the magical spear from above. As the force peaked, the King of Knights let out a fierce, defiant roar. Rah! Two surging forces clashed and cancelled each other out. The ocean's surface was forced downward by the sheer pressure of the wind, sinking several meters before a deafening silence set in. Only to be shattered by a shock wave fierce enough to tear a person apart as it tripled outward in every direction. On the beach, Iris Veil stumbled and fell to the sand, instinctively lowering her body to brace against the aftershock from the battlefield. Also affected were Garrett Suguemiya and Mia Hisa, who had followed the signal from Iris Veil's transmitter and arrived at the seaside park. Their battlefield-honed instincts kicked in immediately, and both dove behind a thick tree trunk for cover. A blast of wind roared past on either side of the trunk, stripping leaves and branches with it. The forest bordering the park groaned under the assault. The battle had erupted right here at the seaside. The closest elevated area was the Bay Warehouse district several hundred meters away, where cranes and high towers offered potential vantage points. Forced to approach through the cover of the trees, Garrett Sugu closed in on the spot where his wife, Iris Veil, had fallen. Garrett Sugu, it looks like someone else is fighting nearby, Mia's voice came through his earpiece. Seems like it's Berserker's master and Lancer's servant. They're moving toward the coastal warehouse area. Garrett Sugu was deeply shaken. The Holy Grail War had only one vague rule: avoid fighting in public. Everything else, alliances, rivalries, was up to the masters and servants themselves. But a servant and a master fighting separately from their partners? That defied everything Garrett Sugu understood about the Grail War. Could it be that Berserker had lost all reason from mad enhancement and abandoned his master, leaving him to be targeted by other servants? If that were the case, then why hadn't a command spell been used to call the servant back? Was it already too late? Garrett Sugu frowned, unsettled by the possibilities. I've spotted the lady, Garrett Sugu, Mia reported again. She's on the beach. Looks like she was knocked over by the backlash from Saber and Berserker's fight. Garrett Sugu tightened his grip on the Walther sniper rifle. Mia, go retrieve Ira. I'm going to check out who's fighting Berserker's master. Understood. With orders given, Garrett Sugu moved at once, weaving through the trees and underbrush of Fuyuki's seaside park, heading directly for the warehouse district. He had no intention of joining the battle or supporting anyone. Saber and Berserker were already locked in a fierce standoff. If Saber looked like she was going to lose, Garrett Sugu would take the shot. From the shadows. To eliminate Berserker's master. He skirted along the eastern edge of the port, dashing through the dark, vaulting over neatly stacked cargo containers in search of a viable vantage point. The ideal spot was the gantry crane. The highest point in the entire Bay Warehouse area. But if that were the case, someone had probably already claimed it, using it as the best lookout post to monitor any approaching masters or servants. That meant Garrett Sugu needed to find an alternate route that wouldn't put him in anyone's line of sight as he closed in on the second battlefield. Before long, he found a position where he could observe both the top of the gantry crane. Should any masters be lurking there? And the fighting within the warehouse streets. Steadying his rifle, he peered through the night vision's scope. But once the scene came into focus, Garrett Sugu blinked, thinking he had misseen. He pulled back from the scope, enhanced his eyesight with mana, and looked again with his own eyes. This can't be. Garrett Sugu had assumed that the commotion Mia detected was Berserker's master fleeing from Lancer's pursuit. What he saw, however, was something he never expected. They were evenly matched. Despite being unarmed, Berserker's master, Tenkai Shiomi, was calmly evading Lancer's relentless strikes. His movements were fluid, composed, even allowing for counterattacks. Sometimes he struck back with bare fists and kicks. Other times, he unleashed magecraft. Likely prepared in advance. The ground and the containers on either side were now covered in jagged ice. Lancer, thrown off balance by the frozen surface, had to constantly correct his footing. A water affinity magus? Garrett Sugu narrowed his eyes. Information on Tenkai Shiomi was scarce. All Garrett Sugu had been able to learn was that Shiomi was affiliated with the Mages Association and had some connection to Tako Ozaki, known for analyzing the Age of Gods and reconstructing the foundation of rune magecraft. But actual records of Shiomi casting magecraft were almost non-existent. Most of his work, classified under special assignments for the association, had been sealed upon completion. A real piece of work, Garetsugu muttered. He gave up on trying to snipe Tenkai Shiomi. His scope couldn't even track the man. Chapter 12, Line of Sight. Garetsugu Emiya's group wasn't the only one watching the two battlefields along the northern coast. 15 kilometers away, in the basement of Fuiuki Church, Kairiko Tomine was also observing the battlefields. Selectively. Through the shared vision of assassin. A few days earlier, he had applied for asylum with the Holy Church under the pretense that his servant had been defeated. But that was merely a ploy to mislead the other masters. The servant he summoned was Hassan of the 100 Faces, who possessed numerous personalities. After becoming a servant, these personalities manifested through his noble phantasm, splitting into countless individual entities. The Hassan killed by Archer was just one of them. To Hassan, the loss was akin to losing a pinky finger. This was the strategy Kairai and his father, Riziko Tomine, had devised to support Tokiomi Tasaka. They staged Assassin's defeat, then continued to monitor the movements of the other servants and masters from the shadows. I didn't expect the first two battles to break out at the same time. Kairai spoke toward an old gramophone resting on the table. A voice came from the gramophone in response. Strictly speaking, those would be the second and third officially recognized battles. Though the audio was slightly distorted, the calm, refined voice clearly belonged to Tokiomi Tasaka, Kairai's mentor in magecraft. Their supposed fallout had also been a smokescreen, intended to conceal their cooperation. After Kairai's feigned defeat, he could more conveniently direct his servants to support Tokiomi from behind the scenes. Lacking a means to share his servants' perception of the battlefield, Tokiomi had to rely on Kairai and Assassin as his eyes and ears. The battle at sea seems to be between Saber and Berserker. Saber's abilities are exceptional. Most of her parameters appear to be at A rank. Berserkers aren't far behind. I suspect Mad Enhancement has boosted her stats. Evenly matched opponents, Tokiomi commented. More than that, Kairai added. From what Assassin saw, Saber and Berserker look remarkably alike. Judging by how quickly they clashed, it's likely they knew each other in life. Perhaps even shared a blood relation. Can you see their masters, Kairai? Only a silver-haired woman standing at the shore, watching the fight. She appears to be Saber's master. She collapsed from the shockwaves of their clash but is now preparing to retreat with help from her guards. A silver-haired woman? Tokiomi sounded surprised. Yes. Silver hair, red eyes. She doesn't look like an ordinary person. Tokiomi paused, then ventured a guess. A homunculus from the Innsburn family, perhaps? Could they have crafted another puppet master? I assumed Garetsugu Emiya was their chosen pawn. Looks like I was mistaken. Kairai didn't respond, choosing instead to keep his own thoughts to himself and continue the report. Berserker's master separated from his servant and returned alone to the city. To pick up two children. He only reached the vicinity of the battlefield after Saber and Berserker had already begun fighting. I see. Tokiomi's voice carried a hint of emotion. As a father, he felt grateful that Sakura had been taken in by someone who could act as her new father. But as a magus, he was slightly disappointed that Shiomi still prioritized such mundane matters, even now. I recall you had some connection with Tenkai Shiomi, Kairai? Tokiomi asked. Yes. Kairai answered simply. It wasn't just Tokiomi's second daughter. For his own personal reasons, Kairai had entrusted his biological daughter, whom he could not raise himself, to Shiomi, who was then gradually stepping away from frontline duties as a magus. Later, he heard that Shiomi had came to Fuiuki and adopted Tokiomi's second daughter under the pretense of needing a qualified heir to inherit his magecraft. As a participant in the Holy Grail War, Shiomi became one of Kairai's surveillance targets due to his role as a master. But even now, Kairai couldn't understand Tenkai Shiomi. This magus, younger than himself, possessed a warmth completely alien to most in their craft. While teaching Sakura magecraft, he had also assumed the responsibilities of a father. Despite being unmarried. And did so with remarkable competence. Whatever the case, perhaps Karin, raised by Shiomi, would live a better life and grow up safely. For someone like Kairai, who had long since lost the ability to feel ordinary happiness, the most he could offer was a silent prayer for the daughter he would never meet again. A gesture born of the moral code instilled in him since childhood. You said Shiomi is near the battlefield. Can you see him? Tokiomi was particularly concerned about Shiomi's movements. If possible, he was more than willing to uphold the gentleman's agreement they made 2 years ago, eliminate Shiomi's servant, then allow him to seek refuge in the church until the Holy Grail War concluded. If needed, he might even ask Shiomi to help look after Rin. After all, Tokiomi knew that regardless of the outcome, he wouldn't be able to return to Rin's side. If he won, he would use the Holy Grail to reach the root. If he lost, he could be killed by another master. Yes, but... Kairai hesitated, which was rare for him. What's wrong? Tokiomi thought something had happened to Shiomi. That man is currently engaged in battle with Lancer's servant. Alone, Kairai clarified, anticipating Tokiomi's confusion. Even Kairai himself found the sight hard to believe. What? Tokiomi's shock was impossible to conceal. He nearly forgot himself, almost abandoning the Tasaka family's composure. Assassin saw it with his own eyes, and I still find it hard to accept, Kairai said, echoing the disbelief. Tenkai Shiomi is evenly matched with Lancer. And I don't think it's because a Lancer is weak. After all, even the weakest servant should be an insurmountable opponent for a human. Even someone like Kairai, with the combat prowess of an executor, wouldn't claim he had a guaranteed victory over his own assassin. Yet Tenkai Shiomi had shattered that assumption. Kairai could only recall when they had once carried out a joint mission for the Mages Association and the Holy Church. Shiomi had demonstrated seamless mastery of rune magecraft. It seems the most dangerous enemy in the Holy Grail War has already been decided. Tokiomi's voice turned grave. In that case, perhaps only the overwhelming might of Archer could ensure victory. By eliminating both Shiomi and his servant, they might finally realize the Tasaka family's long-held wish to entrust their future to the Holy Grail. But doing so would leave Sakura without a home. And Kairai's daughter as well. Was there no better solution to this predicament? Tokiomi couldn't think of one. Kairai, keep watching the battlefield. The other servants and masters have likely been drawn in by these two simultaneous battles. Understood. Kairai accepted the order and continued monitoring the clashes unfolding in the distance. Chapter 13, Why Not Fight Yourself? Showing mercy, are you? Artoria gave her sword a light shake. Invisible air, barrier of the Wind King flared once more, cloaking the golden blade just as the waves began to settle. When she had struck back against the magic spear Morgan summoned from the sky, Artoria had sensed that if Morgan had followed up with another magecraft attack, she would have been left with only two options. Either retreat severely wounded, or release her noble phantasm and reveal her true name to escape the crisis. Now that Morgan had joined the enemy servants in the Holy Grail War, concealing her identity had become nearly pointless. A tactic that could collapse at any time. Morgan's true name had also been exposed in their clash. But unlike Artoria, Morgan displayed abilities she wasn't familiar with, and the consequences of their exposed identities were clearly unequal. I told you, I only came tonight to say hello, Artoria. Morgan wore the same faint, timeless smile she always had. A greeting. Artoria knew full well how cruel and vicious her sister could be. Calling a life-or-death battle a greeting wasn't entirely out of character. If you want to take out an enemy tonight, or bow out yourself, then come at me, Morgan said, her tone teasing. That person won't mind. That person? Artoria paused before realizing Morgan meant her master. Tenkai Shiomi. In the Holy Grail War, of course a master wouldn't object to their servant eliminating another. But if we defeat the top-ranked saber on the very first night, we'll end up with a target on our backs, Morgan said, speculating on the grim scenario with the same serene tone, as if it didn't concern her at all. Too bad for you. I don't plan on exiting the Holy Grail War in a place like this. Artoria remembered her wish, tightened her grip on the sword hilt, and prepared to continue the fight. Humphrey. Morgan raised her magic spear. Just as the clash was about to resume, a sudden explosion of lightning and thunder shattered the tension. Artoria's gaze snapped toward the bayside warehouse in shock. Bolts of lightning twisted and cracked across the ground like serpents, their blinding light visible even from several hundred meters away. Sensing the monolaced in that lightning, Artoria immediately grew wary. Morgan had kept her attention locked to the fight, leaving her no room to observe the rest of the battlefield. Until now. She finally noticed Hire's Veil being helped away by a woman with short black hair. Miya saw. Garetsugu, Miya's assistant. Which meant Garetsugu was nearby too. Artoria quickly grasped the situation. So it wasn't just my imagination. You've already wrapped things up and come here? Morgan seemed mildly surprised, letting out a silent sigh. You'd rather step into battle yourself than let your servant handle it. My husband really is impossibly stubborn. Husband? Artoria was stunned. So someone's trying to interfere on our end, and you're stepping in to block them. Much appreciated. Morgan glanced away, not even looking at Saber, her tone teasing as she addressed someone else. She was holding a long-range telepathic conversation with her master. Artoria realized it instantly. In that case, as your wife, I'll simply observe from the sidelines. Don't hold back. Fight as you wish. With those words, Morgan vanished into spirit form, disappearing from the surface of the sea. But as a fellow servant, Artoria could still see her. Morgan was rapidly heading toward the bay warehouse. Ira had already been evacuated by Mia, which meant Giritsugu was likely observing the battle from that area. Resolute, Artoria, though unable to turn into spirit form, leapt from the water and followed after Morgan, rushing toward the other battlefield where conflict had already begun to unfold in silence. "Oh? You didn't try to stab me in the back, and even put down your weapon? Are you really that unsure of yourself, Artoria?" Morgan, having shed her servant form and changed into modern clothing, looked mockingly at Artoria, who had also swapped into a black suit. Clearly, without any prior agreement, both had independently chosen to end their fight. "If it were a fair duel, I wouldn't hesitate to kill my own sister, even if she were a servant," Artoria said flatly. "But attacking a blood relative from behind, I'd regret that later." With that, she turned her gaze from a Tropa container to the battlefield down Warehouse Street. On one side stood Morgan's master, Denkai Shiomi. On the other, the servant Lancer. The battle wasn't one-sided. Before arriving, Artoria had even assumed that the Thunder Magecraft was a Lancer's doing. In truth, it was the opposite. Ice covered the Warehouse Street. Something that shouldn't exist this season. Shiomi stood at the center. His clothes were torn in a few places, but there were no visible injuries. He looked slightly battered. Compared to him, though, Lancer was in far worse shape. Kneeling with his longer red spear as a crutch, while holding a shorter yellow spear in a guarded stance. Residual electricity crackled across Diarmuid's scorched body. Clear signs of a direct lightning strike. When Shiomi began casting his Grand Magecraft, Thunder Rain, Lancer's master had immediately ordered the release of his Noble Phantasm's seal. If not for the special ability of the Red Spear, Guy Dirg, Crimson Rose of Exorcism, Diarmuid knew that even a servant like himself would have suffered severely from the direct hit. You can nullify and block Magecraft, but you can't fully disrupt it once it's been cast. And you wield a pair of spears, one short and one long. Shiomi brushed the dust from his shoulder. And you recognize the Celtic warriors Ford of the Forked Branch formation. "Lancer, I know your true name now." Lancer showed no reaction. In a battle of this intensity, releasing a Noble Phantasm was inevitable. A Megaswell prepared for the Holy Grail War would naturally deduce Diarmuid's identity from the distinct red and yellow spears. What concerned him more was the presence of Saber and Berserker, who had ended their own battle and arrived nearby, now standing side by side to observe. Lancer feared they'd formed an alliance. An outcome that could spell disaster for him and his master. Just as a Lancer was about to advise a retreat, Berserker suddenly summoned a weapon and hurled it at Tenkai Shiomi. The weapon didn't pierce him. It landed firmly, embedded in the frozen ground. "Borrow this. Finish the fight already," Morgan said with casual ease. Watching Shiomi suppress his irritation, Lancer stepped forward, grasped the weapon, and pulled it free. Hey. Who's supposed to be the master here?" Chapter 14. The meddler arrives. Aside from Giritsugu Emiya, Kairiko Tomine, and Tokiomi Tasaka, Rider Iskander and his master, Waver Velvet, were also observing the battle. Perched atop the crossbeam of the Mayan River Bridge, watching from afar. From that vantage point, they could see not only the fighting at the seaside park but also the warehouse district. "This isn't good," Iskander muttered, his expression grim. "What's not good?" Waver asked, shivering as he clung to the beam in the cold night wind. "That guy, most likely Berserker's master, is about to win," Iskander replied. "At this rate, Lancer will be taken out." Waver was about to point out that such an outcome would benefit their side, but the next moment he was so stunned he forgot his fear of heights. No way. How could a master possibly beat a servant one-on-one? Exactly why this is bad. Iskander's booming voice carried clearly on the night breeze. Saber and Berserker, who were just fighting at sea, have stopped and headed over there. And Berserker even lent him a weapon. Huh? Waver struggled to keep up with the rapidly changing situation. No weapon, just bare hands and Magecraft, and he still managed to overpower Lancer. Now that he has a weapon, he'll be unstoppable. Iskander laughed heartily. To think such a mighty warrior exists in this era. I'd love to recruit him right now and make him my top general in my world conquest. Meeting other servants in the Holy Grail War and conquering them to join his ranks. This was precisely Iskander's ideal scenario. But what thrilled him even more was that in this age, where mystery had long since faded, there was still a warrior who could rival those from the Age of Gods. If he truly intended to conquer this era, then such a warrior, be it enemy or ally, was someone he couldn't afford to overlook. But I thought your plan was to wait until they wore each other out before making a move. At first, I thought fighting heroes from different eras, even taking on 6 at once, would be a once-in-a-lifetime chance. But if I can bring a capable warrior under my banner before that happens, well, that too is the way of commanding armies. Iskander let out a low, powerful growl, like a lion's rumble. Yet the corners of his mouth were curled in a grin. It'd be a waste if they all dove into a brawl and someone got killed now. Isn't that kind of the point? Master or servant, the Holy Grail war is supposed to be kill or be killed. Wait. Waver's half-hysterical protest was abruptly cut off by a sharp flick to the forehead from Iskander. Victory without death, conquest without disgrace. That is true conquest. Drawing the sword at his waist, Iskander swung it through the air, cleaving open the space before him. Mana surged violently, and with it, a radiant noble phantasm manifested. A gleaming ox-drawn chariot emerging from the torrent of magical energy. Flattened against the beam, Waver clung desperately to the steel frame, trying not to be blown away by the gusts. The show ends here. Let's go, kid. Idiot, idiot, idiot. What you're doing makes no sense. If you're not happy, just stay and watch then. I'm coming. You idiot. Take me with you. Now that's the spirit. My master. Iskander grabbed Waver by the collar and leapt onto his noble phantasm, the Gordius wheel, charging full speed toward the battlefield at the Bay warehouse. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Shiomi held Morgan's weapon in his hand, silently admiring its balance. As far as weapons went, it was masterfully crafted. He casually spun it with one hand, left hand forward, right hand pulling the weapon back behind him. A bead of sweat slid down Lancer's cheek. With a single glance, he could tell this young man was highly skilled with a spear. Perhaps even a master of archery and mounted combat. The thought of retreat was pushed aside. As a fellow spearman, Diarmid couldn't resist the urge to test himself against a modern-day peer. Wind whipped at their coats, making a sharp flapping sound. Magecraft or spearmanship? How do you want to die, Lancer? A master forced onto the front lines by his servant won't even get a proper burial, nameless Magus. Diarmid returned the provocation with his own, narrowing the distance with caution, studying Shiomi's next move. He could tell Shiomi was capable of rapidly deploying large-scale magecraft, which must drain his mana heavily. Otherwise, he wouldn't have picked up the weapon Berserker tossed him. So the best option was to close in, to the point where any spell would hit them both. That would force the enemy to favor close combat. What an odd weapon. Was it a spear, an axe, or a staff? Diarmid couldn't tell. Both men tensed, poised to strike. Just then, a sudden, thunderous roar shattered the cold, taut tension. That's Artoria, watching the field, looked to the southeastern sky. An object streaked through the night, crackling with arcs of purple lightning as it descended toward Shiomi and Lancer. A chariot? Morgan narrowed her eyes slightly. Rider, no doubt. Pulled by two bulls, the chariot galloped across the void, their hooves never touching the ground. Purple lightning webbed through the air, and deafening thunder split the skies. The mana released with each boom rivaled the pressure Artoria had felt in her duel with Morgan. A chariot that powerful could only be a noble phantasm. And a chariot-wielding servant almost certainly belonged to the rider class. Vacuum wave. Diarmid heard Shiomi utter the incantation, saw his fingers trace through the air. Rune script flashed and vanished. A massive tornado surged up, blocking the chariot's path. Whoa oh oh oh. Rider didn't slow down. He snapped the reins and charged headlong into the storm. The clash of magical forces exploded with a thunderous impact. The shockwave that followed rocked the battlefield, forcing every master and servant nearby to brace themselves. Rows of metal containers along the sides were sent toppling. After a brief standoff of power, the chariot tore through the vortex and skidded to a halt on the frozen ground between Shiomi and Diarmid. Ha! To greet the king's arrival like that. Such boldness is worthy of praise. Now I'm even more reluctant to let you slip away. Iskander wasn't angry. He saw through Shiomi's magic. It was a message. If you want to join this battle, be prepared to pay the price. What superb wind magecraft. I've no one with such talent under my command. Iskander grinned. How about it? Come serve under me. I'll name you my court magus, second only to myself. No thanks. Sounds like way too much hassle. Completely at odds with his deadly fighting style, Shiomi's tone was laid back, almost lazy. Looks like it's going to be a long night, he thought to himself. Chapter 15, Iskander, King of Conquerors bluntly rejected. Iskander, the founder of the Alexandrian Empire, felt a rare flicker of doubt about his own charisma. Of course, the feeling vanished in an instant. Ryder awkwardly muttered to himself, rubbing his temple with a knuckled fist. The gesture looked almost comical, but it didn't diminish his overwhelming presence in the slightest. He truly exuded a singular, commanding aura. Only someone like him could stand above thousands and rule a nation. Maybe I didn't explain the benefits clearly enough. Young folks these days are all worried about their livelihoods. The King of Conquerors continued without missing a beat. Shiomi lightly tapped the frozen ground with Morgan's magic sphere. A servant with no known true name suddenly shows up and talks about hiring me. How do I know this dramatic entrance isn't just a setup to steal my magic circuits or magic crest? Ha 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 ha. Iskander burst into a hearty laugh. Xiaomi ignored the laughter. He slowly stepped out from behind the chariot, eyes fixed on Lancer. His posture and expression clearly showing that this unexpected interruption wouldn't stop their duel. Humphrey. Though the appearance of a new servant had put Lancer on edge, he couldn't help but feel pleased by the sincerity in Xiaomi's desire to fight. He chuckled softly in return. Both of you. Put down your weapons. You stand before the king. Ryder, now fully aware that the two intended to proceed with their fight as if he weren't there, raised his voice with calm authority. His clear intent to interrupt forced Xiaomi and Lancer to halt once more. After all, if they resumed their battle now, there was a servant nearby with an active noble phantasm. One that could charge them down with that very chariot at any moment. My name is Iskander, King of Conquerors. I have manifested in this Holy Grail War as Ryder. Everyone present was stunned. On the battlefield of the Holy Grail War, a servant's true name was a crucial secret. One never revealed lightly. For a servant to announce it so brazenly was unheard of. And no one was more shocked than Waver, crouched beside Ryder in the driver's seat. What the hell is going through your head, you idiot? Waver, panicked and completely disoriented, had forgotten all fear of Ryder. Gripping the edge of his cloak, he shrieked in protest. King of Conquerors. Iskander? Xiaomi paused briefly. Oh, so it's Alexander the Great. Once he confirmed the man's identity, he returned to his stance. Spear in one hand behind his back. And looked up at the towering figure of Iskander atop the ox-drawn chariot. So what now? The famed King of Conquerors barges into someone else's battlefield, blurts out his true name, and posts a job offer? Sensing no real hostility from him, Xiaomi's tone relaxed, tinged with sarcasm. Iskander looked slightly sheepish. No, I wasn't only recruiting you. It's just that you, a man of this era, possess strength on par with a servant. I couldn't help but admire your talent, so I spoke to you first. Ha! Xiaomi sighed. My offer extends not just to you, but to Lancer, and even to Saber and Berserker watching from the sidelines. If any of you are interested, I welcome you to serve under my banner. Iskander radiated the kind of passion for talent that only a true monarch from legend could possess. I'm not sure about that Lancer over there, but I can almost guarantee that Saber won't take you up on it. Xiaomi chuckled knowingly. You know what they say. Kings don't bow to kings. No monarch would kneel to another without a damn good reason. Oh. So you've already figured out Saber's true name? Care to share it with me? Iskander asked casually, his tone entirely open and curious. Why not ask her yourself? Xiaomi wasn't about to spill the answer. They say recluses are usually arrogant, but even my teacher, Aristotle, wasn't this hard to talk to, Ryder grumbled, casting his eyes down. Only to meet Waver's tearful, wide-eyed stare. Ryder. Waver's voice cracked from strain. First, Ryder had charged in out of nowhere. Then he revealed his true name without warning. Now he was recruiting not just other servants, but even their masters. So it was you all along. A cold, haunting voice echoed across the battlefield, making Waver flinch hard. Lancer's master had finally spoken. Amplified by magecraft, his voice rang out clearly from atop a gantry crane in the warehouse district, reaching everyone present. I was wondering what gave you the gall to steal my holy relic. Turns out you plan to enter the Holy Grail War yourself. Waver Velvet. Lancer's master. Kenneth Elmeloy Archibald. Stepped from the shadows. Only then did Xiaomi recall, the intel said Waver was a student at the Mages Association's clock tower, and Kenneth was his instructor. While Kenneth reminisced with Waver and everyone's attention drifted, Xiaomi quietly tapped the ground with Morgan's spear, activating pre-engraved runes to scan the surrounding presence. Masters. Or rather, magi. Besides himself, there were 3 in total. Servants. 5. No, wait. 6? Didn't expect all the remaining servants, excluding the defeated assassin, to be gathered here. If a brawl breaks out, things could get messy. Better prepare a fallback plan. And if I can use the retreat to eliminate 1 or 2 servants, all the better. He relayed this silently to Morgan. No. The 6th servant here isn't Castor. Castor is just observing us with clairvoyance. Don't mix them up, Morgan replied. Xiaomi fell silent. Everything that exists leaves traces. So even an assassin class with presence concealment couldn't fully escape detection once inside his rune field. But failing to distinguish which was which and drawing the wrong conclusion. That left Xiaomi somewhat frustrated. More importantly, if assassin was still active despite supposedly being defeated, then Kairiko Tomin's request for church asylum was suspect from the start. After all, the current overseer was Riziko Tomin. Just as Xiaomi was deep in thought, The King of Conqueror's booming voice tore through the night. He had no interest in the drama between Kenneth and Waver, but clearly, Iskander, true to form, had come up with yet another bold proclamation. Now then, all heroes chosen by the Holy Grail, gather before me. And if any cowards dare to hide in the shadows, prepare to be scorned by the King of Conquerors, Iskander. Chapter 16, Gilgamesh, King of Heroes. Rider's proclamation wasn't much of an issue. Most of the players had already gathered. Saber, Lancer, and Berserker had all made their appearance. Caster was far off and not worth considering for the moment. Assassin, having retreated earlier, remained hidden in the shadows. Only Archer had yet to show. Shiomi already sensed the presence of the Archer-class servant nearby. At the Holy Church, Kiriko Tamine and Tokiomi Tasaka, who was receiving updates through Kirai, both realized the situation was taking a turn for the worse. And right as Iskander's roar died down, a golden light flared to life in the sky. No one was particularly surprised anymore. With 4 servants already gathered, one more wasn't exactly a shock. The golden light descended atop a street lamp over 10 meters tall, taking the shape of a commanding figure clad in radiant armor. The moment they saw him, everyone felt a chill run down their spines. It was the same servant who had eliminated Assassin in full view just the night before. Archer. 2 vermin daring to ignore this king's claim to the throne. And they show up on the same night. How quaint. With a sneer of deep displeasure, the golden servant swept his gaze over the gathering of servants and magi. His arrogance was on par with Iskander's, yet laced with a cold cruelty the King of Conquerors lacked. Iskander raised a brow, genuinely surprised and a little perplexed. But the reaction that followed was even more dramatic. In an instant, Morgan vanished from Artoria's side and reappeared between Shiomi and Archer, shielding her master. The icy calm that had never left her expression during her clash with Artoria finally gave way to something else. Tension, maybe even fear. She extended her arm, gesturing for Shiomi to step back. "Give me the magic spear, my husband," Morgan said coolly, her voice sharp and wary. Clearly, this golden servant was a threat Morgan deemed serious enough to confront personally. Artoria, still rooted where she stood, was stunned. She had never expected her sister to react like this. "Morgan, what are you?" "I thought it might be someone of note, but it's just a fairy from paradise," Archer said, his crimson eyes flashing. His tone eased slightly, but his words remained merciless. "In light of your fear, I will overlook your disrespect and that of your master. If you do not wish to be crushed beneath the aftermath of my purging of usurpers, withdraw now. I grant you 10 seconds to decide." Iskander called out with half a laugh, "If you're going to talk down to everyone, why not start by giving your name? If you're truly a king, you shouldn't shy away from declaring your title. To stand in this king's presence and fail to recognize his glory. Such ignorance deserves only death." As Archer's voice rose in fury, the space behind him rippled like a mirage. From the golden distortion, weapons emerged. Gleaming, radiant. A sword without a sheath. A long, ornate spear. Each adorned in breathtaking detail, exuding an unmistakable surge of magical energy. These were no ordinary weapons. They were noble phantasms. Those who had monitored the Tasaka estate the night before immediately understood. This was the same otherworldly phenomenon, the very attack that had overwhelmed and erased Assassin. Waver trembled in fear. Kenneth held his breath. And Garrett Suguamiya, hidden in the shadows, tensed completely. But no one was more on edge than Morgan. She reached out her hand. Yet the spear had yet to return to her grasp. The archer before her. He hadn't revealed his name. But Morgan already knew. Gilgamesh. The King of Heroes. The one with clairvoyance that could pierce the future, a man worthy of the title Grandcaster. In terms of magecraft alone, Morgan didn't believe she would lose. But Gilgamesh had far more than magecraft on his side. TSK. The sound from behind made Morgan turn slightly to check Shiomi's reaction. She saw him holding his magic spear, clicking his tongue as he reluctantly stepped out of her protective range, walking straight toward Archer alone. The helplessness on his face gradually faded. This action shocked not only Morgan but everyone present. Without a word, Shiomi raised his left hand, quickly gathering mana. Of course, Gilgamesh noticed his movements. His gaze shifted slightly, moving from his servant to this master. "Hey! I thought this era was full of nothing but mongrels." The King of Heroes gave a cruel sneer, the weapon behind him turning to aim at Shiomi. "Didn't expect someone who could look directly at me with eyes like that. As a reward for catching my interest, I'll leave your corpse intact." With his grin deepening, the weapon behind him fired without warning. The others began to understand why this golden servant belonged to the archer class. He could launch those mysterious weapons without even touching them. His use of noble phantasms was outrageously reckless, like casually hurling rocks. but their destructive power far surpassed mere stones. The ground erupted as if blasted, and the frozen pavement shattered, sending up a cloud of white frost that obscured the battlefield. Everyone held their breath. Morgan, who had raised her hand to stop him, slowly lowered it. Shiomi's slender silhouette emerged faintly from the swirling ice dust. Long spears and swords had embedded themselves into the ground around him, carving out a crater. Yet Shiomi hadn't even used the magic spear Morgan had given him. He dodged Gilgamesh's nameless noble phantasms as effortlessly as avoiding pedestrians in a crowded street. His expression remained unchanged. He continued charging mana in his hand without pause. In a blink, the magical energy surged to its peak. Not bad, mongrel. This just got more entertaining. Gilgamesh's grin twisted further, bloodlust seeping into his tone. If you'd gone down that easily, I'd have been disappointed. Sorry, but I'm not the type to take a beating lying down, Archer. Shiomi crouched low, aiming at the golden servant perched on the street lamp. Eldritch blast. A blast of explosive magical energy surged from his palm. At that moment, the King of Heroes summoned a completely different longsword and hurled it. A stronger explosion than before burst forth, unleashing a shockwave that shattered the ice around them. Waver had to take cover behind Iskander to avoid being caught in the blast. The other servants watched with heightened focus as a human mega stared to challenge a top-tier servant. As the smoke slowly cleared, Shiomi's figure had vanished from the crater. Only the 3 scattered weapons remained. Ha! Not even a scrap left. Behind you, Archer. Shiomi's voice rang out as he slashed his weapon at the weakest point in the golden armor. Archer's waist. Chapter 17, The Unbreakable Circle. It was hard to tell if it was a warning or a death sentence. By the time the words were spoken, the blade of the magic spear was already just centimeters from Gilgamesh. An inescapable strike for any servant. Steel clashed, and sparks flew. Shiomi's attack didn't land on Gilgamesh. Instead, it abruptly shifted course, forming a wide arc around him centered on Shiomi himself. A new wave of noble phantasms had erupted around Gilgamesh like a saint's halo, encircling Shiomi in an instant. There were 6 in total. Not just spears and swords, but also axes, warhammers, and polearms. Alongside some bizarre, unidentifiable weapons with unknown origins or purposes. Every weapon gleamed like a mirror, their polished surfaces reflecting clear images, all infused with potent mana. Each was a fully realized embodiment of mystery, none weaker than the others. Every one of them was a noble phantasm. Without exception. Is this really modern spear technique? Diarmid couldn't help but murmur in awe. As a servant, he saw it clearly. The moment Shiomi sensed the ambush behind Archer, he detected the gate reactivating around him. Even the briefest hesitation, less than half a second, would have left Shiomi overwhelmed and crushed by the surrounding noble phantasms. But he diffused the crisis with a single strike. The noble phantasms, unable to penetrate the circle of his magic spear, scattered in all directions. The golden servant standing atop the street lamp was even forced to leap away, dodging the out-of-control weapons flying back toward him. Even though those noble phantasms belonged to him, once launched, they were like bullets from a gun. No longer under his control. And the one who made that possible was Shiomi, through sheer mastery of the spear. The king and challenger swapped places. The golden servant who called himself king landed on the fractured, frozen road. Shiomi, mid-flip in the air, landed nimbly atop the street lamp where Archer had stood moments earlier. With his back to Shiomi, Gilgamesh turned around coldly as even more gates opened beside him, summoning a new wave of noble phantasms. Don't get ahead of yourself. At his command, 10 brand new noble phantasms surged toward Shiomi. A thunderous roar tore through the air. The explosive light lit up the night, rivaling the brilliance of Shiomi's earlier lightning magecraft. No one could have imagined that simply hurling blades and weapons could unleash such destruction. Noble phantasms flew at Shiomi one after another, only to be deflected by his magic spear with precise strikes. Morgan, who had been bracing for disaster when Gilgamesh first appeared, gradually relaxed, realizing her concern had been unnecessary. Despite his rage, the King of Heroes clearly still looked down on Shiomi for being human. He hadn't fought him seriously. He launched noble phantasms in a relentless barrage, seemingly determined to grind Shiomi down until not even a skull remained. Yet Shiomi showed no sign of faltering. His stance remained firm, and his spear technique stayed sharp and composed. Everyone stared, stunned that a human master could endure a servant's onslaught this long. They had nearly forgotten they were still standing on a battlefield, where a single mistake could mean death against overwhelming odds. Shiomi leapt from the street lamp, swatting away incoming noble phantasms midair as he landed on a nearby empty shipping container. The mist attacks struck the pavement and containers behind him, triggering a chain of explosions and clouds of smoke. He was forcing his way through the rain of noble phantasms, aiming directly for Archer, who remained stationary. He wasn't just defending. He was pushing forward. His will to fight and razor-sharp reflexes far surpassed what any ordinary person could imagine. Was this truly a magus taking part in the Holy Grail War as a master? Or was he some unknown hero born in an age long after heroes had faded from the world? He had only just received the weapon, and yet in Shiomi's hands, it was already dancing like a whirlwind of blooming flowers. In the blink of an eye, Shiomi once again closed the distance between himself and Archer. Close enough that a single thrust of his spear could strike his opponent. The noble phantasms behind Archer surged forward. But Shiomi's body vanished once more. This time, everyone clearly saw it, a flash of light accompanied Tenkai Shiomi's disappearance. That's... Diarmid cried out again. Shiomi had used the same bizarre method when stopping him from intervening in the fight between Morgan and Artoria. It now seems certain. Some kind of spatial displacement magecraft. But unlike the slower form suited for long-distance travel, this version was short-range and instantaneous. In a heartbeat, Shiomi reappeared in midair behind Archer. Without a word, he spun his spear and brought the axe-bladed edge down in a fierce arc. Clang! Both hands gripped tightly around the spear's shaft, Shiomi pressed down with force. But the blade didn't budge an inch further. Archer stood firm, twin golden sabers crossed before him, blocking the strike. Even with his magecraft and agility allowing him to evade noble phantasms and strike from blind spots, the difference in raw physical strength was clear. He couldn't overpower someone with strength ranked B or higher. Humphrey. Gilgamesh let out a cold snort. With ease, he deflected Shiomi's slash and stepped back, the twin sabers vanishing into golden light. Surprisingly, Archer didn't seem to be seething anymore. A cold smirk played across his lips. Arms crossed, the golden servant looked down at Shiomi from above. To think you actually made me use Enki. Not bad for a mere mongrel. His voice brimming with amusement, Archer burst into maniacal laughter. Spreading his arms wide, the air around him twisted once more. This time, 32 gates appeared in full view. Shiomi drew in a deep breath, silently calculating how to navigate this impossible situation. Human. Prove your worth to this king. Or perish. The killing intent in the air turned the winter night into a frozen stillness. Earlier, the others might have been able to stand back and observe. But now, with so many noble phantasms summoned, there was no more room for spectators. If Archer suddenly felt like wiping out the other servants on a whim, these 32 gates would be enough to start. And who knew how many more might follow? 64? 128? Even more? No one could begin to guess the true extent of this golden servant's power. Morgan stepped forward in silence, once again standing between Shiomi and the threat. This much probing is enough, isn't it? I'll use magecraft to block Archer's attacks. You handle the retreat spell. Her voice was calm as she gave Shiomi his orders. Looks like it, Shiomi replied flatly, already preparing to retreat with Morgan. Just then, Artoria suddenly landed in front of the two of them. I'll cover you. You retreat first. Just 10 minutes ago, she had been battling Morgan at sea. Now, clad once again in armor, wielding her invisible sword, she stepped in to shield them. Morgan couldn't help but ask, what are you scheming? Chapter 18, an unexpected complication. Artoria herself wasn't sure why she acted as she did. Was it out of sympathy for the master manipulated by her sister? Or was it the sight of Morgan? So often associated with cruelty and ruthlessness. Fighting so hard to protect someone? Even if that person was only her master in this Holy Grail war, their relationship was purely cooperative. Even enemies have a priority order, Artoria said as she kept a wary eye on Gilgamesh. Seeing yet another servant step forward to oppose him, Gilgamesh grew even more brazen and amused. Very well, very well. If you're so eager to be eliminated here, then I shall grant your wish. He raised his hand slightly. With just one gesture, the noble phantasms already summoned would rain down on Shiomi, Morgan, and Artoria like a storm of arrows. Even so, Artoria could counter with the release of invisible air, barrier of the Wind King, neutralizing Archer's offensive. With Morgan's magecraft creating a window for retreat, escaping wouldn't be difficult. Normally, assisting an enemy in the Holy Grail War would require the master's approval. But Irisviel, acting as a temporary master, had already retreated. Artoria, who had only intended to observe the situation, hadn't expected the battle to escalate this far. Still, the confrontation had yielded valuable intelligence. Now that Mihisa had appeared to escort Irisviel away from the shore, Saber reasoned her true master, Garrett Suguamiya, must also be nearby. However, it was hard to expect any direction from a man who refused to communicate with his servant. Artoria had no choice but to make the decision herself. What are you waiting for? While she's holding off Archer, Retreat already, Morgan urged Shiomi in a low voice. The tone made it clear she was fully prepared to leave Artoria behind. So she's still the same Morgan. Saber sighed inwardly. No, doesn't look like that'll be necessary, Shiomi replied calmly. At that moment, everyone saw Gilgamesh's smirk twist into a scowl of fury. You think someone like you can force me to retreat? You've got some nerve, Tokiomi. His tone was cold and dismissive, yet the glow of the noble phantasms behind him faded, the weapons vanishing into the void. Despite his displeasure, Gilgamesh's icy gaze slid past Artoria and settled on Shiomi, still shielded by Morgan. For the sake of my subject, I'll overlook your insolence today. But next time we meet on the battlefield, if you haven't dealt with the rest of the trash, your death will be no less certain. With those final words, Gilgamesh dematerialized. His golden armor lost all substance and dissolved, leaving only shimmering fragments of light. Tokiomi Tasaka is nothing like that golden show-off, Shiomi remarked knowingly. To push this far in the very first encounter. For someone like Tokiomi, who prefers playing it safe and winning step by step, this definitely wasn't part of the plan. He reached out and gently placed a hand on Morgan's arm. Even after Archer had retreated, she remained in position. So, you're acquainted with Archer's master as well, Morgan suddenly recalled. Ryder looked surprised. Wait, you know that guy? So you challenged Goldie on purpose? Not just Tokiomi Tasaka. I know Lancer's master, Kenneth, and your master, Waver, too, Shiomi said as he buttoned up his coat. I'm affiliated with the Mages Association. Used to be a regular magus who frequented the clock tower. Is that true, kid? Ryder asked, turning to Waver. Yeah. Waver nodded emphatically. He hadn't expected Shiomi to know who he was. After all, the Velvet family was a young bloodline in the world of magecraft, without much history, and his own talents weren't particularly noteworthy. Shiomi, on the other hand, was different. Despite lacking a background, he was said to have caught the attention of Tuko Ozaki, the Grand Puppeteer, and had actual experience with sealing designations enforcement. They were only a few years apart in age, but Waver could feel just how wide the gap truly was. So, what gives? We meet here in the Far East, and you're not even going to say hello? No warm greeting, Professor Kenneth Elmeloy Archibald. Shiomi took a few steps forward and called out loudly in Kenneth's direction. Though he clearly heard him, Kenneth didn't respond. He just stood there, silently observing. Magus really are a cold-blooded, heartless bunch. Shiomi turned around with a shrug, tossing the remark casually to the rest of the group, as if the remaining masters and servants weren't potential enemies. His gaze swept across the gathered servants. Even Lancer, despite the comment being aimed at his own master, couldn't help but offer a resigned nod of agreement. Iskander burst out laughing. Ha ha ha. But aren't you a magus yourself? What a funny guy you are. Fair enough. Shiomi curled his lip in a half-smile. He dropped his arms and looked toward Morgan. If none of the others plan on continuing the fight, then we'll take our leave for now. No objections here, Iskander said heartily. I just came to greet everyone and see if anyone wanted to join my army or give up the Holy Grail, but it looks like that's not happening. Artoria nodded. My master has already retreated. If we're going to fight, I can't just go on without him. Alright then, let's head back. Shiomi let out a yawn and gestured to Morgan. Come over here for a second. Morgan nodded silently. She had no particular preference. It all depended on Shiomi's decision. Just then, Kenneth's voice rang out. Tenkai Shiomi. This may not be the place to ask, but let me confirm something. Go ahead. Shiomi, who had just been preparing to activate his transfer magecraft, paused. You're a magus with no lineage. Are you trying to use the outcome of this Holy Grail war to prove your worth to the Democratic faction? It was a pointed question. Unexpected, coming from Kenneth. Waver's eyes widened as something clicked in his memory. There were three major factions within the clock tower, the Democratic faction, the Aristocratic faction, and the Neutral faction. The conflict between the Democrats and Aristocrats was especially fierce. Kenneth belonged to the Aristocratic faction. Elmeloy. Shiomi, on the other hand, had once worked as a sealing designation enforcer and was known to be closely aligned with the Democratic faction's lord. Chapter 19, The Extension of Factional Strife. Is this really that important? Or is it that, as the head of the Elmeloy family, the only noble faction still on good terms with Bartom Eloy, you've decided to drag the Clock Tower's factional disputes into the Holy Grail War? Shiomi gazed at Kenneth from a distance. My advice? Drop it. Or you'll die. After all, this was the Holy Grail War. Even if the Clock Tower currently dismissed it as some backwater magecraft ritual in the Far East, once the truth got out, even killing Kenneth, monarch of the Aristocratic faction, wouldn't earn Shiomi a death sentence from them. This is my final warning. If you insist on maintaining ties with Valhalla, then I'll have no choice but to prioritize eliminating you in the battles to come, Kenneth declared. Xiaomi raised his eyebrows. He had clearly underestimated the threat he posed if it had come to the point where the aristocratic faction's leader was issuing him a death sentence. Of course, this wasn't something Kenneth did on a whim or for some shallow political gain. He had his reasons. Before leaving the clock tower, he'd already heard countless warnings about Xiaomi from within the El Meloy faction. If you run into Tenkai Xiaomi, you'll die. The Democratic faction is hoping for that outcome too. All the inner leadership of El Meloy were aware of the basic layout of the Holy Grail War. Their absence wasn't from disinterest. Just a lack of sufficient strength. Maybe they were trying to preserve their faction's forces. Maybe they had ulterior motives and were deliberately provoking Kenneth. Either way, when enough people repeat something, it starts to sound like truth. Too many voices had warned him. Kenneth had no choice but to take it seriously. If Xiaomi could be recruited, great. He'd serve as an enforcer for the noble faction. If not, then he had to be destroyed. Kenneth knew exactly how dangerous a former sealing designation executor could be. So he made his move. Well then, if it's a fight you want, I'm in. Shall we settle this now, or save it for another day? Xiaomi glanced at Waver. Hey, Waver, this might be your best chance to take down the teacher you can't stand. Want to team up? Then he turned to Artoria. Saber, I don't know what your master thinks, but if you help me take out Lancer here, I doubt your master would object. Or you could take their side, your call. Still, 2 against 1 isn't nearly as good as 3 against 1. With just a few words, Xiaomi deftly shook Ryder's master and Saber with a mix of logic and opportunity. Ha 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 ha. You're a natural at diplomacy. So what's it going to be, Lancer's master? Are we fighting here, or pulling back? I'll give you a little more time to think it over, Ryder said, not at all opposed to a brawl. Whether it turned into a chaotic free-for-all or a strategic alliance, both suited his tastes just fine. And from the look on Waver's face, he seemed tempted to retreat, Lancer. Seeing that the situation had spiraled out of his control, and that the others wouldn't stand by idly, Kenneth clenched his teeth and gave the order. Lancer could only sigh with a bitter smile. Looks like we won't be fighting today. I hope we'll get a proper duel next time. With that, Lancer's figure vanished from the bay warehouse. What a dull man. Glad he's not my master. That would have been such a bore, Iskander scoffed at Kenneth's retreat. So I guess our little alliance just got cancelled, Xiaomi shrugged. I was looking forward to seeing your strategy unfold, Iskander said, tugging at the reins. But I've got no interest in this kind of fight. Still, if you manage to break through all this pressure and reach me in the end, I'll be even more impressed. I'm not joining your army. Xiaomi pursed his lips. Iskander didn't seem bothered. He simply laughed twice. Then, with a pull on the reins of his twin divine bulls, thunder rumbled and lightning cracked as his chariot tore through the sky toward the void. Farewell. In a flash of thunder and lightning, Ryder and his master disappeared into the southern sky. Only Artoria remained. She turned her gaze toward Morgan. Are you going to fight, Artoria? Morgan crossed her arms, gazing at Artoria with a calm expression. No. Artoria shook her head. She was only acting independently for now because she'd become separated from her master. To not attack right away when facing your enemy. Isn't that a bit too soft-hearted, King Arthur? Xiaomi remarked half-jokingly to Saber. This isn't mercy, Artoria replied, shaking her head again. If you're separated from your master and have nowhere to go, why not come with us for now? Xiaomi suggested. Morgan looked doubtful. You're suggesting we bring Artoria along with us? As you can see, I'm currently being targeted by the aristocratic faction. I don't exactly play by the rules, so of course I want to recruit a few allies. Xiaomi handed the magic spear back to Morgan. Maybe El Meloy has the same idea. After all, bringing over the leader of the 3 knights would be quite the win. Artoria remained silent, weighing the idea. For a servant, joining forces with another master and servant without official orders was essentially a public declaration of alliance. Besides, your master will surely come looking for you. Rather than running around, why not wait here? Xiaomi added. We might even use the opportunity to discuss possible cooperation with your master. Desperate times call for desperate measures. Artoria made up her mind. What do you think, sister? Interesting. Let's give it a try, Morgan replied without objection. She could clearly see Xiaomi was trying to make use of Artoria. Something she found perfectly acceptable. Xiaomi raised his head. Come a little closer, King Arthur. Artoria, a bit puzzled, stepped forward toward them. As soon as she stopped, a sudden gust of wind surged through. A flock of pitch-black crows burst into view, swirling around the 3 of them. What is this? Artoria's eyes widened in surprise. But before the shock could settle, the crows vanished just as quickly, and the scene around them cleared. They now stood in the courtyard before the front door of a Western-style mansion. "This is my home. Let me be your host and welcome the first guest to visit during this Holy Grail War," Xiaomi said with a light, casual smile. Just then, Morgan stepped forward like she owned the place. She naturally followed the path to the front door, pulled out a key, and unlocked it. "All who come are guests. As long as you don't start a fight here, I suppose you're welcome to stay," Morgan said to Artoria, toying with the key. She then glanced at Xiaomi, seemingly checking if her actions were appropriate. Artoria couldn't help but smile. "What's so funny, Artoria?" "Nothing, it's just. So much has happened tonight, I couldn't help myself." Saber turned away, looking toward the gate. "You two go ahead inside. I want to check the area one more time." In truth, Artoria was simply feeling a little emotional. Her sister had shown such an ordinary, human expression. Chapter 20, Innsbruck Castle. There is a national highway in Fuyuki City that stretches westward from Mama Town, away from the city lights. At the end of the road lies a vast, undeveloped forest. Deep within that forest stands a classical castle built in the style of medieval Western Europe. It belongs to the Innsbruck family and serves as their exclusive stronghold. One of the original bases established by the three families who created the Holy Grail war system in Fuyuki. Anyone attempting to enter the forest is immediately monitored by the castle's owner. Hidden behind layers of illusions and magecraft barriers, no master or servant can pass unnoticed. Yet even with full control over the forest and using crystal ball magecraft to scan far and wide, Iris Veal hadn't seen any sign of Saber entering the area. She let out a quiet sigh without realizing it. "Feeling tired, Iris?" Garrett Sugu asked. Iris Veal quickly masked her unease and smiled, shaking her head. "You were caught so close to the battle between Saber and Berserker. It's a blessing you weren't caught in the crossfire. You should really rest," Garrett Sugu said with concern. Even though Mia had swiftly evacuated Iris Veal from the beach and brought her safely to the Innsbruck castle, the proximity of the battle still posed a real danger. She could have been injured without realizing it. "I'm fine. But Saber," she murmured, voicing her worry to her husband. Garrett Sugu glanced at the command spells on the back of his hand. "For now, it seems the King of Knights is unharmed. I saw her with my own eyes walk away. Willingly. With Berserker and his master." He had stayed hidden in the Bay warehouse until the very last moment, but that decision ultimately forced Saber to act on her own. The way they withdrew. "It felt more like Caster's style than Berserker's," Garrett Sugu remarked. "If not for his ability as a master to identify a servant's class, he might have been completely misled." "I haven't had the chance to explain yet," Iris Veal began. After waking up in the castle under Mia's care, she had quickly caught up with Garrett Sugu and began scanning the forest with her crystal ball. Being separated from her servant was a critical risk. It left them exposed. Any master and servant could launch a surprise attack without resistance. You and Miss Mia were too far away to catch the details, but Saber and Berserker share a direct connection. "Saber knows her true name," Iris Veal said. "Her name is Morgan. She's Saber's older sister." Garrett Sugu's furrowed brow finally eased. "That's a serious problem. She's clearly a Berserker with mad enhancement above B rank, yet she acts like a normal servant. And on top of that, she's a top-tier magus from the Age of Gods." He studied the map of Fuyuki, growing increasingly aware of how difficult this Holy Grail war was becoming. And that wasn't the end of it. Berserker's master was Tenkai Xiaomi. Garrett Sugu knew he hailed from the Mages Association, had achieved the Pride designation at a young age, and had even been involved in executing a sealing designation. Even so, he believed his unorthodox tactics would still allow him to assassinate a magus like him. But all those assumptions had been shattered in tonight's battle. A human magus who could fight on par with a servant, go toe-to-toe with Lancer, and even challenge the enigmatic archer. It was clear now. Berserker's master might be the most underestimated threat in the Holy Grail War. "Our top priority is to locate Saber. If necessary, we'll use a command spell to force her return," Garrett Sugu said. "If she and Irie remain apart beyond tonight, we'll have to evacuate and find a new place to hide." Iris Veal asked, then. "Garrett Sugu, do you know where Saber is?" "Probably around there." Garrett Sugu pointed out the window toward Mama Town. "I could feel the moment Berserker took her master and Saber. Moving from the coastal warehouse behind the new city to the residential district of Mama. Then that must be Berserker's master's hideout," Iris Veal concluded. But that raised another issue. How were they supposed to make contact? Or should they just show up in person? A magus's home was also their workshop, and such places were always protected by complex barriers. What if Saber had actually been taken by force? Berserker's master probably reached some sort of agreement with Saber. That's likely why she agreed to go with them, Garrett Sugu explained to Iris Veal with a hint of regret. He knew full well he bore part of the blame. By refusing to communicate with Saber and letting his wife act as the master in his place, it had led to this. Once Iris Veal and Saber were separated, they lacked any proper means of contact. Don't worry about it, Garrett Sugu. I expected something like this might happen, Iris Veal gently reassured him. Then, a sudden fluctuation in the barrier made Iris Veal tense up. Already? A servant's attacking us? Garrett Sugu guessed from her expression, picking up his weapon in preparation. Mia, stationed at the door, was immediately on alert as well. No, it's a messenger, Iris Veal said, walking over to open the window. A green bird landed on the windowsill. Iris Veal extended her hand, and the familiar released a pulse of mana. The message was carried through that magic and transferred to her. Once the transmission was complete, the bird vanished into mist like an illusion, prompting a small moment of admiration from Iris Veal at the sender's finesse. She shut the window. Garrett Sugu, Berserker's master sent a message. He is requesting a meeting with Saber's master tomorrow. Saber will rejoin us later, she relayed to Garrett Sugu. He said it's about something important, though he didn't say what. That sounds suspicious, Garrett Sugu remarked with a scoff. So, should we turn him down? Iris Veal asked. No, we're going. The fact that they're offering to send Saber back first is clearly meant to put us at ease, Garrett Sugu said, setting down his gun. Besides, we need to regroup with our servant as soon as possible. At that moment, Mia, who had been quietly standing by the door, finally spoke. Then tomorrow, I'll drive the lady to meet Berserker's master and reunite with Saber. Garrett Sugu, as always, you'll observe from the shadows. Sounds good. What do you think, Iris? Garrett Sugu asked his wife. Iris Veal responded with a confident smile. Of course I'm going. I want to see what kind of person Morgan's master is. Chapter 21, A Night of Surging Undercurrents. The living room of the Shiomi residence. I've delivered the letter to Artoria's master, just as you asked, Morgan said, seated at the edge of the sofa as she looked toward Shiomi. Thanks. I could have done it myself. Shiomi replied, shaking his head. Morgan gave a faint smile. Still, it's part of my duty as a wife. Are you seriously sticking to that role? Shiomi asked weakly. Any man would falter if a stunning beauty called him her husband. But the issue here was that it was Morgan Le Fay. Even if it was only nominal, could he really handle something like that? May I ask what you've invited my master here to discuss? Artoria waited for their banter to end before speaking in a deliberately serious tone. She was aware of the message carried by the familiar. As you've seen, Lancer's master has declared war on me. He has even issued a death sentence, Shiomi said slowly, taking a deep breath. So, my priority now is to defeat Lancer and his master as quickly as possible. Once Lancer is out of the picture. That's how war works. That's why my husband proposed an alliance, Morgan interjected. If you don't plan to accept it, Artoria, that's fine. It's just a matter of whether we take care of you or Lancer's camp first. Sister. Artoria let out a sigh, clearly exasperated. But this was how Morgan always operated. And Artoria knew that well. Even if her master had his own strategy, if Morgan disapproved, she would oppose it without hesitation. You've heard him. My husband needs Lancer eliminated. Once the servant is gone, the master will be easy to take down, Morgan continued smoothly, keeping control of the conversation. If we're going to fight them, we need to keep other servants and masters from interfering. So this is about cooperation, Artoria concluded. If necessary, she and Iris Veal might even have to help fend off other factions that could interfere with Shiomi and Morgan's assault on Lancer. Shiomi had revealed far too much tonight. Kenneth wouldn't be the only master seeing him as the biggest threat now. Helping Shiomi and Morgan wasn't without benefit either. After the previous battle, Artoria understood just how difficult Morgan would be to face. Even if they did end up as enemies, better preparation would be essential. Trying to ambush Morgan's master without careful planning would likely fail. But how did you know where my master was? Artoria asked her second question. Morgan smiled with indifference. You should gather intelligence before the Holy Grail War begins. The Innsburn family came from Germany to participate in the war in the Far East. They were bound to have a base of operations. It wasn't hard to uncover. Even as she spoke, Morgan didn't turn around. Her gaze remained on Shiomi's drowsy face. Now that you know where your master is, you're free to leave whenever you want. Tomorrow, Denkai and I will be waiting for you and your master. It wouldn't take Artoria long to return to the Innsburn castle from Mama Town. That was already her plan. Much appreciated. Artoria never imagined she'd be saying those words to Morgan. But even as she left the room, Morgan didn't look at her. She simply leaned back on the sofa, looking completely at ease. You should get some rest too. I'll keep watch. Lancer's no match for me. Sakura and Karan were already asleep, and Shiomi was clearly exhausted, so Morgan would stand guard. Whether as a servant or in some other capacity. Then, I'll leave it to you. Shiomi couldn't turn down Morgan's kindness and agreed sincerely. After witnessing tonight's battle, every participant in the Holy Grail War would be re-evaluating their stance. I see. So Shiomi has caught the attention of Lord Elmeloi. At the Tosaka residence, Tokiomi sighed lightly after listening to Kairai's report through the Magecraft communicator. The conflicts within the clock tower are escalating. Now they're even trying to eliminate opposing factions during the Holy Grail War. Kairai offered his thoughts. After tonight's battle, Kenneth probably realized how much of a threat Denkai Shiomi poses. On par with a servant. If he and Lancer had to face Shiomi and Berserker together, their odds of winning would be slim. And not just them. Even Kairai himself had to seriously consider whether he could actually win against Shiomi in a real fight. He had observed Shiomi's combat methods up close during joint operations between the Mages Association and the Holy Church. That man's approach had always been to perceive the bigger picture through small details. Dissecting enemy magecraft by exploiting its weaknesses and using precise, refined techniques to dismantle it from within. But what Shiomi displayed tonight, casting large-scale magecraft back-to-back, was something Kairai had never witnessed before. Could that be the power granted by the restored Age of Gods rune system? Tactically sound, no doubt. But in doing so, Kenneth has ensured that Shiomi will now make him the top priority, Tokiomi said with a slight smile. No matter what happens next, Shiomi will focus on taking down Lancer. Based on Kairai's intelligence, Tokiomi was fairly certain they had a good grasp of Lancer's true identity. On top of that, they've taken Saber with them. It's likely they've already come to a private agreement. Not to interfere when Tenkai Shiomi and his servant attack Kenneth, Kairai added. What's your decision, Master? Let them fight, Tokiomi replied, opting for the most cautious strategy. He would allow the other masters and servants to wear each other down. Once only one or two groups remained, Gilgamesh would step in to clean up the rest. Victory in the Holy Grail War would naturally fall into the Tosaka family's hands. I understand. I'll find a way to send Shiomi a message. Let him know that I won't interfere in his battle with Kenneth. Tokiomi didn't want Shiomi to die fighting Kenneth. What he hoped for most was that Gilgamesh would defeat Shiomi's servant, while he, as a master, would spare Shiomi himself. That way, he would not only win the Holy Grail War, but also secure a future for both Sakura and Rin. Pardon the interruption, Tokiomi. Kairai's assassin just reported. Castor and his master have been located. Chapter 22, Awakening. Then, Denkai Shiomi had a dream. It was a dream someone once had in their youth. A dream about a witch who cherished quiet, gentle stories. A library with no one in sight. Through the window, the sky was a muted gray. The soft, rhythmic patter of falling rain. Amidst the seemingly endless collection of books, a young girl sought knowledge with unwavering focus. In the dim, warm light of the library, she sat at a desk like a child lost in a fairy tale. She was envisioning a certain dream. Between a master and their servant, a channel formed through magical energy exists. Originally intended only for the master to supply mana needed to sustain the servant's form. Yet this system came with an unintended side effect the original creators of the Holy Grail War had never predicted. At times, while dreaming, the master might catch glimpses of the heroic spirit's memories. Sometimes they're mere fragments. Sometimes, more complete recollections. There's no set rule. Ah! Shiomi opened his eyes, staring at the familiar ceiling of his bedroom. The lingering sensation of the dream hadn't faded, and his body felt unusually heavy. He lay there, unwilling to move, letting out a short sound. Then came a soft sigh. Shiomi wasn't even sure where the feeling came from. You're awake? A young voice spoke beside him. Turning his head, he saw Karan's small face. Is it that late already? He glanced at the alarm clock and was startled. I need to get you and Sakura to school. Karan shook her head. No need. Ms. Morgan called the school this morning. She told them my sister and I would be staying home today. Quick on her feet, isn't she? Shiomi had no complaints, making a dry joke to himself. Honestly, it was for the best. Letting Sakura and Karan continue attending school under current conditions would only keep distracting him. Did you have a nightmare? Karan asked, her eyes sparkling with interest. No, just tired, Shiomi replied. Oh. Her eyes dimmed slightly, like she was a bit disappointed. Shiomi let out a speechless sigh. You were hoping for something terrible, weren't you? Just your imagination, Karan replied with an angelic smile. There had always been something subtly off, and as she grew, Karan's precociousness became more apparent. Along with it came a personality that could only be described as a little troublesome. Was it something wrong with his approach to raising her? Shiomi couldn't help but wonder. After all, he'd never been married, had no experience with parenting. So it wasn't impossible that he'd made mistakes. Who does she take after, really? By the time he muttered that, Karan had already run out of the room. He forced himself to sit up and tried to recall the dream he'd just had. Because of the spiritual link between master and servant, it was possible to drift into each other's memories during sleep. Normally, that could be avoided by consciously suppressing awareness. But last night, Shiomi had fallen asleep completely unaware. Because Morgan had used magecraft without any warning. That woman's personality really is nasty. No wonder they call her the Witch of the Land of Rain. Thinking back on last night, Shiomi instinctively wanted to complain, but the words caught in his throat. The Land of Rain. What kind of place was that? In various legends, Morgan often appeared as a figure in the tales of King Arthur. But even in the world of Magi, verifiable information about her was scarce. Was that her past? Or perhaps the time when she was just a young girl, full of dreams? And the way she looked. So much like Artoria. It made it all the harder to dot their connection as sisters. Breakfast at the Shiomi household was never plain, especially with 2 children under 10 who were still growing. Shiomi made sure they had a nutritious daily diet. After breakfast, Karn watched TV in the living room while Shiomi checked on the magecraft workshop. Since it was a rest day, Sakura was staying home and studying magecraft under Morgan. Today's lesson focused on imaginary numbers. Sakura was born with the imaginary attribute. Defined in the world of Magi as something that might be possible but does not exist in the material world. Some Magi, versed in modern science, refer to it as the imaginary numbers attribute. The essence of this type of magecraft remains deeply mysterious to modern Magi. Those who naturally possess it are exceedingly rare, and truly gifted individuals among them appear perhaps once in a century. Looks like she's picking it up quickly, Shiomi remarked as he took a sip from his cup, watching Sakura's practice. Though she still had a long way to go, the fact that she could already touch upon a non-existent realm left Shiomi genuinely impressed by her potential. She's very gifted. A brief explanation is all it takes for her to instinctively grasp the concept of nothingness, Morgan said plainly from her chair nearby. Shiomi chuckled. That just means you're a good teacher. I couldn't teach her any of this. Only basic, practical things that barely make use of her potential. He knew Sakura could become a capable magus even without learning imaginary numbers magecraft. But if she could train in an art aligned with her natural talent, and with enough time, even attaining the grand rank in the Mages Association might not be impossible. Mother is amazing. She knows so much. Sakura suddenly chimed in, full of admiration. Her way of addressing Morgan made Shiomi choke on his drink, coughing violently. Cough. 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 He really wanted to call Morgan out for putting strange ideas into Sakura's head. But after all, she'd impersonated a stepmother to call the school, and now she was giving Sakura a lesson in Age of Gods level magecraft. Shiomi could only cough and shoot her a resentful look. Try not to get too worked up. The curse hasn't fully worn off yet. My magecraft only keeps your daily functions stable for now, Morgan said with a faint, knowing smile. Besides, you look like you didn't sleep well. Did I accidentally use a curse spell? Is that something you can do accidentally? Shiomi twitched at the corner of his eye. It's nothing. Just had a lot of dreams. Morgan's gaze turned a little more serious. Then let me mix you something to calm your nerves. The Holy Grail war is life or death. If you don't rest properly, you'll die. A witch's sleeping incense, huh? Shiomi muttered, neither agreeing nor refusing. Still, I doubt I'll drop dead from a bad night's sleep. Actually, I was hoping we could discuss how to approach our attack on Lancer and his master. That's good to hear. But before that, there's something else you should know, Morgan said. The Holy Church has issued a summons to all masters. Shiomi froze mid-sip. What? Chapter 23, Alliance. After pressing the doorbell outside the Shiomi residence, Iris Veil was greeted by a young girl about the same size as her daughter Ilya. She had long silver hair with softly curled ends and golden eyes. Guests? The girl asked. Iris Veil and Artoria had come prepared to visit Tenkai Shiomi as fellow masters, but they hadn't expected to be met with a scene like this. Crouching slightly to speak through the iron gate, Iris Veil smiled gently. Yes. We're acquaintances of Mr. Shiomi. We arranged to meet with him today. They're guests. Let them in, Karan, Shiomi's voice called from the front steps. It seemed he had come out when Karan went to answer the door. Okay. Karan promptly opened the gate and let them in. Shiomi came down to greet them and casually lifted Karan with one arm. What a surprise. Is this your daughter? Seeing the child who looked to be about Ilya's age, Iris Veil couldn't help but ask, touched by the resemblance. My youngest daughter. Her name is Karen, Shiomi replied naturally. You have more than one? Iris Veal was taken aback. Shiomi looked quite young. Having one child wasn't too surprising, but two? That was unexpected. The younger one looked around 4 or 5, and the older had to be at least 6 or 7. Yeah. Ignoring Iris Veal's surprise, Shiomi simply nodded to both her and Artoria, then led them inside. Once they were indoors, he set Karen down and told her to go play with Sakura in the garden. Then he welcomed his guests into the living room. Your servant. Morgan isn't here, Artoria noted. To meet with another master and servant unaccompanied. Even if they had agreed beforehand not to fight. Was bold, to say the least. She's out playing with the kids, Shiomi said, gesturing toward the window that faced the backyard. Through the glass, Morgan could be seen seated on the sun-drenched green lawn, teaching Sakura magecraft. She'd found the workshop too stuffy for lessons and had decided midway to move the class outside. Shiomi had no choice but to let her do as she pleased. Artoria, still a little surprised, looked away and decided not to question what Morgan might be thinking. After all, even if she tried to understand, it probably wouldn't help. Before we move on to the main topic, there's something I'd like to confirm first. Shiomi gestured for them to help themselves to the tea, then asked, early this morning, the Holy Church issued an emergency message. They're calling on all remaining groups to unite and eliminate the caster faction for violating the secrecy rules of the Holy Grail War. Are you two aware of this? Iris Veal's expression turned solemn. Yes, we've heard. According to the church, they're the ones behind the recent string of child abductions in Fuyuki. Targeting children in their sleep, causing disappearances and even deaths. And? Shiomi followed her gaze toward Artoria. Yesterday, while I was on my way back from your residence to reunite with my master in the Innsburn forest, I encountered Castor, Artoria said, frowning deeply, clearly troubled. He was mentally unstable. He mistook me for Saint Jeanne d'Arc. Jeanne d'Arc? Shiomi raised an eyebrow. Is Castor connected to her in some way? He introduced himself as Gilles de Race, Artoria added. Ah, Bluebeard, Shiomi muttered, referencing the infamous moniker from folklore. But that detail was secondary. Originally, the plan had just been to discuss with the Innsburn group whether they should agree to the church's proposal and temporarily suspend hostilities to deal with Castor. But now, judging from how Castor approached Saber, he'll most likely try to contact us again, Iris Veal said, relaying Giritsugu's assessment. If we can use that chance to set up an ambush. I doubt it'll be that easy, Shiomi replied. The church is offering a command spell as a reward for this mission. Judging from the situation, the one who likely used theirs up is Tokiomi. Whether Archer's retreat was related to that was uncertain. Tokiomi hadn't made a direct appearance. But it was the most probable explanation. And command spells are invaluable sources of magical power. Even just using one to support a servant can completely turn a battle around. I thought so. Iris Veal nodded. Shiomi's assessment aligned closely with Giritsugu's. Shiomi paused to think. Let's say we exploit the fact that Castor mistook King Arthur for Jeanne d'Arc and set a trap. Kenneth will no doubt try to seize the opportunity, sending his servant to interfere and steal the credit. Reclaiming a command spell in the process. You want to hit two birds with one stone? Artoria caught on quickly. Shiomi gave a small grin. Exactly. Initially, I just wanted to coordinate with other masters to arrange a ceasefire and focus on eliminating the Lancer group. But now that the church has issued this order, whether I get involved or not, Castor is bound to come after you again. So you're escalating your previous proposal. From a truce to a full alliance? Iris Veal asked calmly. Everything was proceeding just as Giritsugu had predicted. Tenkai Shiomi wasn't like a typical Magus. He seemed human. Especially since he had children of his own. Castor is running wild in town. It's only a matter of time before Sakura and Karen become targets. Shiomi's expression darkened as he glanced toward the garden. Even if my barrier is strong enough to keep them out, as a father, I can't just sit by and do nothing. His reasoning was sound. Neither Iris Veal nor Artoria had any cause for doubt. I understand. If Ilya were living in this city, I'd ask Saber to defeat Castor immediately, Iris Veal said. Ilya? My daughter. Ilyas Veal von Innsburn, Iris Veal said with a warm smile, the unmistakable expression of a mother. When the Holy Grail War ends, she may come to live in Fuyuki. I hope she can be friends with your daughters then, Mr. Shiomi. Shiomi returned a soft, understanding smile. Let me confirm this formally. Miss Iris Veal, you agree to a ceasefire between our sides, and to form an alliance to eliminate Castor. And, if necessary, repel interference from Lancer and his master. Yes. Iris Veal extended her hand. She had a personal motive as well. Garrett Sugu considered Kiriko Tomine dangerous. If possible, she wanted to use Tenkai Shiomi's strength to eliminate him from the Holy Grail War. This alliance was essential for both her and Garrett Sugu. Then it's settled. We're allied. Shiomi shook her hand and nodded. After releasing her hand, he didn't move to see them out. Instead, he leaned back into the sofa and added, as a gesture of goodwill, and to hinder the other groups, I can also share Archer's true name with you. Please do, Artoria said, her expression turning sharp. Shiomi narrowed his eyes slightly. His name is Gilgamesh, the King of Heroes of Babylonia. Chapter 24, Winter Sunlight. After the meeting, Shiomi made his way into the garden to find Morgan. The Witch of Britain clearly had endless patience for entertaining children. As Shiomi crossed the soft green and gold grass, he saw Sakura and Karin using magecraft to awaken blooming flowers and weave them into a crown, which they then placed atop Morgan's head. It was a make-believe coronation ceremony. It wasn't my idea. It was theirs, Morgan said from where she sat on a blanket, as if trying to explain herself. Shiomi let out a dry chuckle. I didn't say anything. Morgan, seeing no way out, silently accepted the jab and changed the subject. Is the meeting over? Didn't I share my senses with you during the talk with the Innsburns? Shiomi replied. He slowly sat down beside her. The sun-warmed blanket helped ease the aching fatigue in his body. As he watched Sakura show off her magecraft to Karin, he continued, I thought you'd object to forming an alliance with the Saber faction. The Holy Grail War isn't some solo duel. When necessary, forming an alliance to take down another side is a perfectly rational strategy. Morgan gave a faint smile. I don't have any lingering attachment to Artoria Pendragon. I'm just curious. Shiomi found her phrasing odd but wasn't sure how to press further. She had lived through that age of legend. For someone like him, from long after, there was no way to fully grasp it. In the end, Shiomi chose to trust Morgan's stance. The alliance was temporary, after all. Once the current crisis passed, hostilities would resume. He was already mentally prepared to be the one to break the ceasefire first. But when I told them Archer's true name, they were stunned, Shiomi said, shifting to lie lazily on his side. Gilgamesh, the King of Heroes. The legendary figure from humanity's oldest epic. The one who led mankind in its parting from the gods, opening the curtain on the decline of the Age of Gods. From the age of Gilgamesh, it would be roughly 15 or 16 centuries before Solomon, the king of magecraft, returned divine blessings to the heavens, marking the true beginning of the gods' withdrawal from the world. No matter how he looked at it, Shiomi knew Gilgamesh would be the most difficult enemy in this Holy Grail War. And to make things worse, he had manifested as an archer, possessing the independent action skill, allowing him to act even without a master. Even if the contract with Tokyomi was severed, he would still have time to find a new one and continue fighting. You really know history, Morgan said with a half-teasing tone. Shiomi rolled his eyes. If that's supposed to be praise, I'll take it. But there's something I don't get. How could you recognize the King of Heroes? The end of the Age of Gods in Britain came almost 2,000 years after the 5th dynasty of Ruk. There's a reason. We've met. A few times, Morgan replied vaguely. She didn't want to go into detail. Explaining further might reveal glimpses of the future, and tampering with fixed quantum records could shift outcomes in unpredictable ways. Long life sure has its perks, huh? You get to witness all sorts of things, Shiomi said, dropping the topic. After all, the Holy Grail War system in Fuyuki had only been officially established about 2 centuries ago, but according to church records, it was already the 726th Holy Grail. If similar rituals had existed before then, especially during the Age of Gods, then it wouldn't be strange if Morgan had encountered Gilgamesh before. That's what Shiomi believed. Even without Morgan's help, he could have uncovered Archer's true name. But explaining how would have been much trickier. Additional task, put that arrogant Gilgamesh in his place, wherever he may be. Reward, Archer's true name. After Gilgamesh's appearance last night, Shiomi received this notification. Since he hadn't had a chance to communicate with Morgan, he didn't realize she already possessed such vital information. So at the time, feeling both helpless and obligated, Shiomi took it upon himself to probe Archer. Naturally, he did so with confidence. Certain that even if his opponent was absurdly strong, he could still pull out safely. That Morgan had uncovered Archer's true name was a mixed blessing for Shiomi. The downside? It wasn't the least bit useful. You look rather gloomy. Is it because knowing your enemy's identity has made you anxious about the Holy Grail War? If that's the case, I permit you to sever our contract now. Don't try that reverse psychology crap. I may not have joined the Holy Grail War by choice, but I'm not so spineless that I'd back out, Shiomi snapped, flashing a grin as he dismissed Morgan's provocation. Morgan gave a small nod. That's more like it. Those are the words and attitude my husband should have. Seriously, how long are you going to keep playing this pretend marriage thing? Until the Grey War ends? Shiomi still wasn't used to Morgan's bizarre treatment. Is being my husband really so unbearable? Morgan asked with a look of mock contemplation. Ugh, whatever. Do what you want. It's not like I'm losing anything. Giving up, Shiomi shifted his position and laid his head on Morgan's lap like a pillow. After all, Morgan was a breathtaking beauty. Even if this was just playing house, Shiomi didn't exactly feel like he was coming out on the losing side. A little indulgence. A lap pillow. Wasn't going to hurt. Turning in already? What a poor example for your children, Morgan teased, entirely unbothered by his behavior. Just conserving energy. The Innsburns will be contacting us tonight. If Castor really insists on mistaking Saber's identity and tries a surprise attack. Shiomi closed his eyes, avoiding Morgan's gaze. Then we'll be waiting in ambush, ready to catch him mid-strike. Isn't it just a forest over there? Morgan's jab hit harder than expected. Shiomi, who had been privately excited at the idea of confronting a legendary hero and staging a dramatic battle like in the stories, was left speechless. In your opinion, do you really think Lancer's master will head for the Innsburn forest instead of launching a direct attack here? Morgan suddenly shifted tone, like a lord consulting her strategist. It's hard to say. That's why I plan to bring Sakura and Karin with me when the time comes, Shiomi replied. I don't want them dragged into the Holy Grail War. And you can't be too trusting of allies. Let alone enemies. Human magus never do learn, do they? Morgan remarked with cutting sarcasm. Shiomi chuckled softly with his eyes closed. If that's the case, then I'm a human magus too. Do I fall into the never learns category? Hard to say, Morgan replied offhandedly. You're more the type who never learns. But is really good at not learning. You really don't hold back, do you? Chapter 25, Ambush Night fell over Innsburn Castle. So, Berserker's master is that naive? Agreeing to an alliance so easily? After listening to Iris Veel's report, Garrett Suguamiya gave his assessment. It doesn't match the kind of monstrous combat strength we're dealing with. No, maybe he's just naturally cautious, trying to resolve things as safely as possible. Iris Veel looked at her husband's cold expression. The face of the infamous Magus killer. And shook her head. No, Garrett Sugu. I don't think that's it. Maybe the reason Berserker's master agreed to help set up an ambush for Castor is even simpler. She frowned, analyzing the situation intently. Oh? You've met him in person. You should know more than I do, Garrett Sugu said with a smile. The kind reserved only for his wife and daughter. Because he is a father too, Iris Veel said. His 2 children are about the same age as Ilya. She couldn't deny the empathy stirring inside her. It was a raw, sincere emotion that she couldn't suppress. Then it's probably just as you said, Garrett Sugu replied. He had no desire to argue. Nor any reason to. He still held on to his humanity. How could he? Shiomi, someone moved by the same emotions. Did he mention how we're supposed to meet up? Garrett Sugu asked. Driving from Mama Town to this forest still takes a while. Iris Veel placed a piece of obsidian on the table. This is the token Mr. Shiomi gave me. He said it's infused with his synchronized mana. Once it's shattered, he'll know our location. Then he'll appear here, Garrett Sugu said, his voice cooling. That strange form of teleportation. Was it a grand magecraft performed by Berserker, or Shiomi's own doing? If it was the former, it was manageable. But if it was the latter, then Shiomi couldn't be judged by the logic of an ordinary magus. Garrett Sugu. Iris Veel reached out and held his hand. She understood the unease in his heart. Having met Tenkai Shiomi once, she was even more certain. Their chances of winning the Holy Grail War were slipping. Unlike her husband, who was burdened with strict and lofty ideals, Shiomi had none of those unreachable ambitions. He was the kind of person who used his own hands to grasp every bit of happiness around him. Winning the Holy Grail War didn't matter. Staying alive, returning to his children. That's what truly mattered. You could tell just by looking at him. Iris Veel knew. People who aren't obsessed with winning are the hardest to defeat. I won't let you fight alone, she said softly. I'll protect you. Saber will protect you. And there's also Miss Mia. She couldn't deny who Garrett Sugu needed most right now. Only one person could bring back the strength in his heart. The cold, unyielding strength that could shut out all pain and fear. That was something Iris Veel could never give him. If there was one thing she could do, it was simply hold him and offer comfort. But even so, Iris Veel still found herself praying earnestly. Even if she couldn't be of help, she wished the heavens would grant her just a little more time. Let her stay by Garrett Sugu's side like this. If only for one more second. And just as she made that desperate wish, it scattered like an illusion. A sudden jolt in her chest made her entire body tense. The forest barrier spell she had only recently learned pulsed violently through her magic circuits. It was an alarm. "They're here already?" Garrett Sugu's murmur was unexpectedly calm. Just from the change in Iris' expression, he had already grasped the situation and shifted into combat mode. "Should I send the signal?" "Yeah. Mia and I will fall back. This fight is yours and Saber's to lead," Garrett Sugu said. "Good chance to see what he's capable of." "Understood." Iris Veil picked up the obsidian and stepped into the outer hall. Channeling her mana into it, the obsidian crumbled into dust and vanished from her palm. A sudden gust stirred through the enclosed hall. From the void, a swirl of black crows burst into being. As the crows dispersed, Denkai Shiomi appeared. Along with his servant, Morgan. "But you brought the children too?" Iris Veil asked, stunned. "No one can guarantee Kenneth won't take the chance, while Morgan and I are away, to attack my home and take them hostage," Shiomi replied matter-of-factly. "Are there any guest rooms? I'd like them to get some rest first." "Yes, there are." Snapping back to her senses, Iris Veil quickly moved to respond to the unexpected situation. After settling the two children in a guest room, she activated a crystal ball for farsight, projecting the image captured by the barrier spell. A strange black robe fluttered in the wind, and the red markings across it looked soaked in blood, flickering through the forest's branches. "That's Castor." Shiomi narrowed his eyes, his expression turning grim. Castor, Gilles de Race, wasn't alone. He was surrounded by over a dozen young children. The oldest among them looked barely Sakura's age. "Innsburn, can you pinpoint their location?" Shiomi asked. "Just over 2 kilometers northeast of the castle," Iris Veil answered. "They don't seem to be moving deeper into the forest." Morgan closed her eyes, sensing for a moment. "Seems he's deliberately avoiding the castle's barriers. Lingering just outside to lure us in. At least he's not some third-rate Magus's servant. If it's bait, then those children." Artoria's tone sharpened with anger. If they triggered the traps and defenses outside the barrier too hastily, there was no way to ensure the children wouldn't be caught in it. "Then let's give him what he wants. Let's go meet the enemy, King Arthur," Shiomi said to Artoria. That was exactly what Saber wanted. She was about to agree when something struck her as off. "Us? You're coming with me?" she asked. "Of course." Shiomi smiled with confidence. Artoria turned to Morgan. "Then, what about the queen? There are children here. I'd like her to stay and protect them," Shiomi said, then looked at Iris Veil. "If sharing a room with another servant makes you uncomfortable, you're welcome to move elsewhere, Innsburn." "No, I'll stay here," Iris Veil replied. A suspicion had already begun to form in her mind. That Garrett Sugu might be watching those children. If Castor was successfully defeated, then maybe. As a mother, she didn't want children like Ilia dragged into battle, even if it meant opposing Garrett Sugu's objectives just a little. So for now, she would let herself be the hostage. "Got it. Saber, let's go." Shiomi turned into the corridor and activated the teleportation magecraft. Chapter 26, Battle for the Innsburn Forest, 1. This wasn't Artoria's first time experiencing spatial transfer magecraft, so she was calm enough to take in her surroundings more carefully. She had initially assumed it was a spell Morgan could cast without incantation, but the truth was that it was Tenkai Shiomi's specialty. Both Garrett Sugu and Iris Veil had misread the situation. Flowers? That wasn't the only change. During the transfer, Artoria noticed something different. The form of the magic had changed. Previously it had manifested as crows. This time, it was flower petals, carrying the scent of spring. "Is something wrong?" Shiomi asked, already checking the familiar wound on his shoulder. Artoria shook her head. "Just a little surprised. The crow-formed barrier reminded me of the Fisher King from my era." "You mean the crippled one who lived in seclusion and used crows as his familiars?" Shiomi asked, catching on quickly. "That's right. His daughter was the mother of Galahad, one of my knights of the Round Table." A trace of helplessness and sorrow passed over Artoria's face. Lancelot, Galahad's father. And Guinevere. They were all tied to the downfall of the Round Table. Even so, Artoria had never blamed any of them. No one was at fault. And because no one was at fault, she had sought the Holy Grail. To change the fate that led to such an ending. The form of the transfer magecraft reflects my mood. Since I've got the rare honor of assisting the legendary King Arthur, I figured as a magus, I might as well act the part of that flower-tossing magus, Merlin, Shiomi said. Artoria gave a wry smile. "Well, you don't resemble Merlin in the slightest." "I'm not an incubus," Shiomi replied, his smile fading. As they exchanged a few short lines, the teleportation spell completed. The two were now deep within the forest, more than 5 kilometers from Innsbruck Castle. To Castor, they had walked right into his trap. But from the other side's perspective, the ambush had worked. They'd lured Castor into exactly the situation they wanted. TCH. We're too late? Xiaomi clicked his tongue, his voice cold, eyes brimming with hatred and fury. The children they'd seen earlier through the crystal ball. Every last one of them. Were dead. Even with the fastest transfer, less than 30 seconds had passed, yet all those lives had been claimed by the Holy Grail War. The air was thick with the stench of fresh blood, and the forest floor was strewn with small corpses. Grisly proof that just moments ago, those children had been alive. Welcome, then. I knew swift action would bring results. Castor stood in the middle of the carnage, smiling broadly, facing Artoria, who now gripped her weapon in barely contained rage. He was proud of this grand feast he had orchestrated. His smile oozed self-satisfaction. The black robes draped over his body were soaked in the blood of the sacrifices, making their crimson sheen all the more vivid. What do you think of this horrific scene? Heartbreaking, isn't it? It's tragic, isn't it? Can you imagine the pain these innocent children felt as they died? But Jen, compared to what I've done since losing you, this doesn't even begin to count as a tragedy. Castor's tone was disturbingly calm, as if he were boasting of his accomplishments while describing the massacre before them. You bastard. Xiaomi didn't want to hear another word from Castor. Mana surged in his palm. He was ready to unleash a blast. To stay indifferent in the face of this would only mean becoming numb, detached. He was going to kill him in a single shot. Even if it meant revealing more of his abilities, Xiaomi didn't care. If it had been Sakura or Karin among those children, he would have already lost control. The last 2 years of peaceful life hadn't been a lie. He truly loved those two. That's why his rage now was unstoppable. Wait. Artoria grabbed Xiaomi's right hand, even though she too was seething with fury. As if oblivious to Xiaomi's anger, Castor gazed at Saber with twisted delight, a sticky smile spreading across his face. Oh, Anne. Your eyes, burning with rage. They're absolutely beautiful. The reason Artoria stopped Xiaomi from releasing his magecraft was now clear. Hidden beneath Castor's robe was the last surviving child among the hostages. The child was still being held under Castor's arm, sniffling, crying. This deranged servant had deliberately left one alive. Not out of mercy, but to use as a human shield. If Xiaomi had fired that spell, it would have severely wounded Castor. But the child would have been reduced to ash. Let go of that child. Artoria shouted. Monster. Xiaomi clenched his teeth and changed the shape of the mana in his hand. You hate me that much? Of course you do. How could you forgive me for turning my back on God's love? You were once the most devout of all in your worship. This war is meant to choose the heroic spirit worthy of the Holy Grail. If you fight in ways unworthy of a heroic spirit, the Grail will cast you aside. And now that you've already been revived, what use do you have for it? Still. If you, Anne, are that desperate to save this one child. To their surprise, Castor released the child, letting him stand on his own. Come now, little one, rejoice. A devout servant of God says she'll save you. That all-powerful God has finally shown mercy. But just so you know, all your other friends are dead. The child, too overwhelmed to comprehend what was happening, clung to the one hope he saw. Saber. Wailing, he ran toward Artoria and clutched at the folds of her skirt. Xiaomi gently rested his hand on the boy. Listen, it's dangerous here. Run, straight ahead. You'll see a big castle. Go there and ask for help. As Artoria crouched to comfort the panicked child with as much tenderness as she could muster, Castor looked momentarily puzzled. Oh? Just then, Saber sensed a fluctuation in magical energy. Looking down, she realized. The child had lost consciousness. What did you do? She demanded, instantly suspecting Xiaomi's touch. Using children as sacrifices for magecraft. You really are the lowest of the low, Xiaomi sneered as he turned back to Castor, eyes narrowed. Too bad. I'm a magus too. As long as my rune is engraved on him, he can't be used as a sacrifice in any spell. Grah! You bastard. You ruined everything. Castor's shriek tore through the misty forest like a blade, fury boiling over. But clearly, the one child wasn't his only intended sacrifice. The others, the ones already slaughtered, had been sacrificed too. From the blood that soaked the ground, a dozen writhing, dark green sea demons slithered out, their forms birthed from the children's remains. They quickly surrounded Xiaomi and Artoria. Chapter 27, Battle for the Innsbruck Forest, 2. Looks like I wasn't the only one prepared for this meeting. After unleashing his fury, Castor's face twisted into a dangerous grin. You've brought along a magus capable of defiling even the divine. And you're one to talk, Castor, Xiaomi shot back, voice thick with mockery. You've got no right to bask in the radiance overflowing from the Holy Grail. Not like this so-called Saint Jeanne d'Arc. He knew full well that the Grail in Fuiuki wasn't the Church's true Holy Grail. Ha 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 ha. Radiance from the Lord? I, Gilles de Race, have no need for such things. A thick, leather-bound tome had somehow appeared in Castor's hand. The cover shimmered with a damp sheen, like it had been soaked in water. But it was human skin. It was just a book, yet it pulsed with magical energy on par with a noble phantasm. My comrade Prelati left me this grimoire, granting me the power to command an army of demons. Arms spread wide, Castor shouted joyfully to the sky, "This is my bliss, my faith, my ideal." Shiomi ignored his manipulation and calmly took the child from Artoria, cradling him in one arm. "This is bad. The mana flow from these summoned creatures is off. I don't think we can whittle them down slowly," Shiomi muttered, glancing at the unfamiliar child. "And with this burden, Saber." Artoria immediately understood. Leaving the child aside while they fought would only split their focus. And worse, the child, having just been saved, might end up as fresh food for the sea demons. "What's the plan?" she asked, slashing at the enemies with her invisible blade. She was stretched thin. Just as Shiomi had said, every time one sea demon was slain, 2 or 3 more took its place, tightening the encirclement. "We hit them with grand magecraft. And take that caster out in the process," Shiomi said. Artoria instantly caught on. "Like you did when you fought Lancer last night?" "Exactly. These sea demons have high magic resistance. I need to boost the spell's power and precision." Shiomi crouched down, half kneeling in the wet soil, laying the child gently against his legs so he was resting in the mud. "But I'll need you to hold them off while I prepare." "How long?" Artoria swung again, this time cutting down 5 in one breath. "Still not enough." "1 minute," Shiomi replied. At that, a surge of determination welled up in Artoria. "If I can't even hold for a minute, then I don't deserve to fight for the Holy Grail." She smiled, eyes sharp as blades, fixed on the monsters. And the caster beyond them. Castor had watched the battle from the previous night. He remembered Shiomi. Knew he was a powerful magus, capable of rivaling even a servant. So he opened the grimoire in his hands and began chanting. The sea demons swelled in number at an absurd pace. In mere seconds, their count had grown to over 30. Shiomi and Artoria could barely even see Castor anymore. And it was exactly because of this explosive rate of multiplication that Shiomi had put so much weight on 1 minute. "But don't worry. If we can't hold out even a full minute, someone will be more than happy to wipe us both out with a massive spell," Shiomi joked. "Even you?" Saber blinked, then chuckled. "Then I'd better give it everything I've got. Wouldn't want to become another casualty of my sister's magecraft." It was their first time working together, and they were from opposing factions. Deep down, Artoria was tense, unsure if this hostage swap would be enough to keep Morgan in check. After all, Shiomi was far more capable in combat than Iris Veil. But Shiomi's actions had already eased the doubts in Saber's heart. "One last thing. How would you like Castor to die? Burned, electrocuted, frozen, or torn apart by the wind?" Shiomi had already begun preparing the grand magecraft. Saber let out a small laugh. "Then go with whatever won't set the forest on fire but can still kill him." "As you command." Innsburn Castle, guest room. "You seem awfully pleased, my dear husband." Morgan's tone carried a hint of displeasure. Iris Veil blinked in confusion. As someone who was also a wife, she instantly recognized where that tone was coming from. "I think it's just Mr. Shiomi's way of easing the tension," she replied with a wry smile. "It helps Saber focus on the fight and gives him a chance to protect that child." Sharing a room with a servant from a rival camp had already gone far beyond what Iris Veil had anticipated. "No need to be so nervous. Even if you're Artoria's master, I'm not going to lay a hand on you," Morgan said, gaze fixed on the crystal ball. "Besides, without the Lesser Grail, the Greater Grail can't be activated anyway, right?" Iris Veil was momentarily shocked, then quickly caught on. "You already knew. It's a unique system, I'll give you that. But if the servants knew the Grail War's true purpose from the start, the whole thing wouldn't function." Morgan spoke of the Holy Grail War's inner workings like it was casual gossip. As expected of a magus from the Age of Gods, Iris Veil admitted. "Still, the fact remains. It is a wish-granting device. That much is true." "So?" Morgan turned to face her. "Are you serious?" "What?" Iris Veil didn't follow. But Morgan didn't elaborate. She simply lowered her gaze slightly. "Looks like break time is over. Your place really is swarming with visitors." "What?" Iris Veil suddenly realized she'd been so focused on Shiomi and Artoria's battle that she'd failed to notice another intruder breaching the barrier from a different direction. "Kanath El Meloy," she murmured, shifting the crystal ball's viewpoint to spot Kenneth stepping into the forest. But he was alone. His servant had gone toward Saber's location. That was fast. Morgan rose from her chair with elegant composure. The protective wards surrounding Shiomi's domain had been tampered with. Subtly and skillfully, like a lock being picked. Morgan, already monitoring the state of the barrier, had noticed this at once. "Are you going to intercept him?" Irisveil asked. "Isn't that exactly why I was left here? Even if someone casts a spell strong enough to level a city, this room won't so much as flinch." Morgan walked out calmly and shut the door behind her. At once, Irisveil felt a powerful barrier surge into place. No one could enter or leave now. Not without breaking it first. Still, the ward didn't cut off communication with the outside. Irisveil could continue watching the forest through her crystal ball. Meanwhile, Garrett Suguemiya was out there in the woods beyond the castle, silently monitoring the battlefield. Chapter 28, Misjudgment. Kenneth Elmeloy Archibald's appearance in the Innsburn forest was no coincidence. Shortly after Tenkai Shiomi and Morgan had left their home, Kenneth, fully armed with magical implements and formal magecraft attire, arrived at the Shiomi residence in Mama Town along with his servant, Lancer. A magus's home was, by definition, a workshop. Typically fortified with layers of powerful barriers and riddled with traps meant to deter both fellow magi and ordinary intruders. In that regard, Tenkai Shiomi was no exception. Though the Shiomi residence's barrier gave the illusion of being unguarded, it was in fact a meticulously designed trap. A single misstep in approach would have triggered complications impossible to shake off. Of course, for someone like Kenneth, Clock Tower's prodigy and heir to a prestigious magical bloodline, it was merely a mild inconvenience. He effortlessly opened a gap in the barrier and ordered Lancer to search the house, only to find it abandoned. Kenneth then used a tracking spell to trace Shiomi's trail, which led him all the way to the Innsburn forest. His plan was straightforward: pick off Castor first, and then seize the right moment to eliminate Tenkai Shiomi. But if the latter had already recognized his disadvantage and sought cooperation from another faction, especially one of the three founding families of the Holy Grail war system, then it was a different matter entirely. On his way into the forest, Kenneth discovered that Castor was already engaged in battle. The rapidly multiplying sea demons had engulfed the battlefield. Even Lancer could see only Saber, her figure flashing in and out among the creatures, while Castor stood at the center, sustaining his magecraft through the grimoire in his hands. Yet amid the swarm, Lancer could sense another overwhelming magical presence. One on par with Castor's. A presence equal to a servant. Which meant Berserker was there too. After their initial encounter the night before, Kenneth had come to understand this Berserker was no ordinary brute, but a rare outlier with spellcasting prowess rivaling top-tier casters. He surmised that Saber and Berserker were currently acting on their master's orders, temporarily joining forces to take down Castor. Which made Kenneth's next move obvious. He instructed Lancer to remain hidden, wait for the right moment, and then dive into the fray. Snatching credit for Castor's defeat at the crucial moment. Command spells were invaluable strategic assets. Even if his side didn't take any losses, it was essential to prevent other masters from gaining more. Lancer found the tactic distasteful. Stealing another's glory ran counter to his knightly ideals. But letting Castor continue his atrocities was far worse. So he swallowed his pride, obeyed Kenneth's command, and readied himself to strike down evil as a lone ranger. With Lancer's mission set, Kenneth moved deeper into the Innsburn forest and reached the castle grounds. He had prepared for everything. If it came to a magecraft duel, even if he were outnumbered 2-1 or 3-1, he was confident he could triumph over any of the masters, including Tokiomi Tasaka. As expected of a distinguished German magus lineage, Kenneth scoffed, surveying the estate. Even in a remote backwater like this corner of the Far East, they still insist on living in a castle. Even though, in terms of ancestry alone, the Innsburn line was no less venerable than that of the Archibalds. Kenneth placed a glass bottle filled with mercury on the ground, its weight pressing the base deep into the earth. He had used magecraft to lighten the container enough to carry it with him. Though the bottle appeared no larger than a standard school lab container, it actually held a full 40 kilograms of mercury. Fervor, my sanguis. Boil, my blood. This was the centerpiece of Kenneth's magical arsenal. His prized mystic code, the Volumen Hydrargyrum. Automatopratum Defensio, Automatopratum Quaerir, Delectus and Crisio. With each incantation, the mercury spilled across the floor began to tremble faintly, as though beads of high-tension liquid were rolling free from the vessel. The doors to Innsburn Castle weren't locked, in fact, they stood wide open.